Committee will come to order. The committee meets today to receive testimony from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on the National Defense Authorization budget request from the administration. Like last year, the committee has spent a number of weeks hearing from our military leaders, the intelligence community, and outside witnesses before asking the Secretary to testify on the current budget request. What we've heard over these weeks reaffirmed the fact that the U.S. faces a wider range of serious threats than at any time in our history. The director of the Defense Intelligence Agency told our committee that, quote, "The world is far more complicated, it is far more destabilized, it is far more complex than at any time I have seen it." Currently serving senior commanders have described the ability of the military we rely upon to face those threats as, quote, "minimally adequate." Aviation units in the Marine Corps cannot meet training and mission requirements. With less than a third of Army forces at acceptable levels of readiness, the Army is not at a level that is appropriate for what the American people would expect to defend them. Those were quotes as well. Another is less than half of the Air Force combat units are ready for a high-end fight. It is the smallest, oldest, and least ready force across the full spectrum of operations in our history. Those snippets of testimony across the services is remarkably consistent, candid, and disturbing. Indeed, my own visits with service members recently leads me to suspect that even these assessments don't tell the whole story. We often discuss readiness, but it's a vague term without concrete meaning for a lot of Americans. Recently, I've heard firsthand from service members who have looked me in the eye and told of trying to cannibalize parts from a museum aircraft in order to get a current aircraft ready to fly an overseas mission, of getting aircraft that were sent to the boneyard in Arizona back and revitalized in order to fly missions, of pilots who were flying well below the minimum number of hours required for minimal proficiency and flying fewer training hours than those of adversaries that they were sent to meet. I've heard of not having enough senior enlisted people to train and supervise the younger ones and those who remain working longer and longer hours. And I've even heard firsthand from service members who have to buy basic supplies like pens and cleaning supplies and paper towels out of their own pocket, because if they go through the military process, it'll take 3 or 4 months, and for them, it's just not worth it. I expressed concern last week that there is a rise in Class A mishaps, which may be another indicator of a readiness crisis. Last year, General Dempsey testified that the FY16 funding request was the lower ragged edge that was necessary to execute the defense strategy and that we have no slack, no margin left for error or strategic surprise. Yet the budget request from the administration this year is $18 billion lower on meeting those basic requirement minimums, and it is less than the budget agreement of last December. It seems clear that the same strategy we assumed would have us out of Iraq and Afghanistan, where Russia would be a friend thanks to the reset, and where terrorism was confined to the JV teams, does not continue to be valid. That is also the same strategy that has led us to cut troops' equipment, training, and bases. Both Congress and the administration are responsible for this state of affairs. Over the last 5 years, the President and Congress have cut over $500 billion from defense, and these cuts come at a cost. It is increased risk that our troops will be killed or captured, that a mission will fail, or that we will lose a fight. What our hearings over these last few weeks have shown is that this risk is real, and there is evidence to prove it is growing. The military is strained to a breaking point. Our witnesses today are in a unique position to help our political leadership and the American people understand the state of affairs, and I would say we would all be derelict in our duty if we try to sweep it under the rug. On a final note, this morning the news brought us again stories of tragedy in a terrorist attack in Europe. The administration's budget request asks for more money to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and I think that is understandable and appropriate. What I do not understand is that the law required the administration provide the Congress a written document laying out its strategy to fight ISIS. That document was due February 15th, 2016. We've received nothing, and there's no indication that anything is on the way. The world is growing more dangerous. We have cut our military too much, and I believe it's up to the political leadership in this country to take the action necessary to enable our servicemen and women to defend American lives and American interests. The men and women who serve and the nation deserve better than we are now. I'd yield to the distinguished gentlelady of California as the acting ranking member today for any comments she'd like to make.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent that the ranking member's statement be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Over the last several weeks, we have received testimony from combatant commanders, from our service chiefs, from service secretaries, and they all have given us their best military advice, and it could not be more clear. The threats, as the chairman has noted, we face are real and growing. Just this morning, attacks in Brussels claimed at least 26 lives and dozens were injured. Our hearts certainly go out to the Belgian people as they recover from this horrific act of violence. Secretary Carter, you have emphasized that the President's budget request centers on 5 key challenges: deterring aggressive behavior on the part of a resurgent Russia and a rising China, containing the dangerous, unpredictable North Korean regime, neutralizing Iran's malign influence, and defeating ISIL and other manifestations of violent extremism. Unfortunately, in the midst of these challenges, we are searching for budget workarounds instead of fixing the underlying problem. The Department of Defense needs fiscal certainty to reliably perform critical missions and to maintain lasting superiority. Secretary Carter, you have asserted that the fiscal year 2017 shortfall risk can be mitigated, but the DoD needs a comprehensive, long-term budgetary solution. We must remember the devastating harms inflicted by sequestration and the Budget Control Act caps. Years of budgetary standoffs leading to numerous threatened government shutdowns, one actual government shutdown, and congressional over-reliance on continuing resolutions have combined to produce debilitating fiscal uncertainty. Although it is unclear whether the House will pass a budget resolution this year, the resolution passed last week by the House Budget Committee raises more questions than it answers. The committee-passed resolution is nominally BBA compliant, but it would offer a net increase of roughly $18 billion to the defense-based budget. It would do so by assuming that $23 billion of overseas contingency operations, what we call OCO funding, would be used for base budget purposes. But it would not increase the BBA top line of $74 million for OCO funding. My first question is, which OCO beneficiary would end up paying the bill in this shuffle? Would the money come from the portion requested for DoD, that is, the warfighter? Would it come from the State Department, which also receives OCO funding to perform vital functions in contingency operations? Or would it come from both? Chairman Price's budget resolution also poses another open-ended question. It appears to allow the chairman of the House Budget Committee to adjust OCO funding levels going forward on the basis of new information, which means that at some point, supplemental OCO funding could be used to circumvent BBA funding levels. The DoD, the Congress, has to make hard choices, especially when it comes to balancing force modernization with the very, very critical need that the chairman addressed to sustain readiness. Would these issues become harder or easier if near-term OCO needs are supplemented by longer-term base budget requirements in fiscal year 2017? How would the DoD prioritize its needs if OCO funding levels are reduced within the BBA top line? And most importantly, what poses the greatest risk to national security, providing funding for base budget requirements at the level requested by the President, or providing funding for near-term OCO requirements, at least initially, at levels lower than requested? We need to carefully consider Chairman Price's proposal and every other potential adjustment to the defense budget as we work to build this year's defense authorization bill. We must also give the department additional flexibility to reduce excess infrastructure and overhead, to phase out old platforms, and to adjust the healthcare and benefit structure. The President came to us with a budget that focuses on adapting to the threats that we face today, and also one that follows the law by conforming to the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015, including approximately $582.7 billion in discretionary budget authority for the Department of Defense. So now we must uphold our end of the deal in Congress. Thank you all for being here today. I look forward to your testimony, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The committee is pleased to welcome today the Honorable Ashton B. Carter, the Secretary of Defense, General Joseph Dunford, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as the Honorable Mike McCord, the Comptroller and Chief Financial Officer of the Department. Gentlemen, again, welcome to the committee. Without objection, your full written statements will be made part of the record. And, Mr. Secretary, you are recognized for any comments you'd like to offer.
Thank you very much, Chairman Thornberry. Congresswoman Davis, thank you. Thanks all the members of the committee. Thank you for hosting me here today. I want to begin by condemning this morning's bombings in Belgium. Our thoughts and our prayers are with those affected by this tragedy, the victims, their families, and survivors. And in the face of these acts of terrorism, the United States stands in strong solidarity with our ally, Belgium. We're continuing to monitor the situation, including to ensure that all U.S. personnel and citizens are accounted for. We also stand ready to provide assistance to our friends and allies in Europe as necessary. Brussels is an international city that has been host to NATO and to the European Union for decades. Together, we must and we will continue to do everything we can to protect our homelands and defeat terrorists wherever they threaten us. No attack will affect our resolve to accelerate the defeat of ISIL. I'll have more to say about this later in the testimony. Thank you again for hosting me today and for steadfastly supporting DoD's men and women all over the world, military and civilian, who serve and defend us. I'm pleased to be here with Chairman Dunford and Under Secretary McCord to discuss President Obama's 2017 defense budget, which marks a major inflection point for the Department of Defense. As I will describe in detail, the threat from terrorism is one of the 5 challenges, as has been noted, that the United States now faces and will in the future. In this budget, we're taking the long view. We have to, because even as we fight today's fights, we must also be prepared for what might come 10, 20, or 30 years down the road. Last fall's Bipartisan Budget Act gave us some much-needed stability after years of gridlock and turbulence. And I want to thank you and your colleagues for coming together to help pass it. That budget deal set the size of our budget. And with this degree of certainty, we focused on its shape, changing that shape in fundamental but carefully considered ways to adjust to a new strategic era and to seize opportunities for the future. Let me describe the strategic assessment that drove our budget decisions. First of all, it's evident that America is still today the world's foremost leader, partner, and underwriter of stability and security in every region of the world, as we have been since World War II. That's thanks, in large part, to the unequivocal strength of the U.S. military. And as we continue to fulfill this enduring role, it's also evident that we're entering a new strategic era. Today's security environment is dramatically different from the last 25, requiring new ways of investing and operating. 5 evolving strategic challenges, namely Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and terrorism, are now driving DoD's planning and budgeting as reflected in this budget. I want to focus first on our ongoing fight against terrorism and especially ISIL, which, as the attacks in Belgium today again remind us, we must and will deal a lasting defeat, most immediately in its parent tumor, in Iraq and Syria, but also where it's metastasizing. And all the while, we're continuing to help protect our own homeland. Let me give you a quick snapshot of what we're doing to pressure and destroy ISIL's parent tumor in Iraq and Syria. In Iraq, with our support, the Iraqi security forces retook Ramadi and are now reclaiming further ground in Anbar province and are simultaneously shifting the weight of their effort towards Mosul in the north. With our advice and assistance, Iraqi and Kurdish security forces have begun the shaping and isolation phase of the operation to collapse ISIL's control over Mosul. That was the mission Marine Staff Sergeant Louis Cardin was supporting when he gave his life over the weekend, providing critical protection to Iraqi forces and coalition military advisors in northern Iraq. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family and with the other Marines injured in Saturday's rocket attack. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten, and our global coalition will complete the mission they were supporting. In Syria, capable and motivated local forces supported by the United States and our global coalition have retaken the East Syrian town of Shadadi. This town served as an important logistical and financial hub for ISIL and a key intersection between its Syria and Iraq operations. In fact, Shadadi was so important to ISIL that its so-called Minister of War was involved in ISIL's defense of the town. We killed him while our local partners expelled ISIL from the town. In doing so, the coalition campaign severed the last major northern artery between Raqqa and Mosul, and therefore between ISIL in Syria and ISIL in Iraq. And we're intent on further isolating and pressuring ISIL, including by cutting off its remaining lines of communication in southern Syria and into Turkey. In addition to local forces we're working with, 90% of our military coalition partners from Europe, the Gulf, Asia, 26 countries in all, including, by the way, our ally Belgium, have committed to increase their contributions to help accelerate the defeat of ISIL. We've increased strikes on ISIL-held cash depots, oil revenues, and sites associated with its ambitions to develop and use chemical weapons. And we're addressing ISIL's metastases as well, having conducted targeted strikes against ISIL in Libya and Afghanistan. As we're accelerating our overall counter-ISIL campaign, we're backing it up with increased funding for 2017, as the chairman already noted, requesting 50% more than last year. Now, before I continue, I want to say a few words about Russia's role in this. Russia said it was coming into Syria to fight ISIL, but that's not what it did. Instead, their military has only prolonged the civil war, propped up Assad, and as of now, we haven't seen whether Russia has retained leverage over Assad to facilitate a diplomatic way forward, which is what the Syrian people need. One thing is clear, though. Russia's entry into Syria didn't impact our campaign against ISIL. Along with our coalition partners, we're intensifying our campaign against ISIL in both Iraq and Syria, and will continue to do so until ISIL is dealt a lasting defeat. Two of the other four challenges reflect a return in some ways to great superpower competition. One is in Europe, where we're taking a strong and balanced approach to deter Russian aggression. We haven't had to devote a significant portion of our defense investment to this possibility for nearly a quarter century, but now we do. The other challenge is in the Asia-Pacific, where China is rising, which is fine, but behaving aggressively, which is not. There, we're continuing our rebalance to the region to maintain the stability we've underwritten for the past 70 years, enabling so many nations to rise and prosper in this, the single most consequential region for America's future. Meanwhile, two other long-standing challenges pose threats in specific regions. North Korea is one. That's why our forces on the Korean Peninsula remain ready, as they say, to fight tonight. The other is Iran, because while the nuclear accord is a good deal for preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, we must still deter Iranian aggression and counter Iran's malign influence against our regional friends and allies, especially Israel, to which we maintain an unwavering and unbreakable commitment. Now, addressing all of these 5 challenges requires new investments on our part, new posture in some regions, and also new and enhanced capabilities. For example, we know we must deal with these challenges across all domains, and not just the usual air, land, and sea, but also especially in cyber, electronic warfare, and space, where our reliance on technology has given us great strengths and great opportunities, but also led to vulnerabilities that adversaries are eager to exploit. Key to our approach is being able to deter our most advanced competitors. We must have and be seen to have the ability to ensure that anyone who starts a conflict with us will regret doing so. In our budget, our capabilities, our readiness, and our actions, we must and will be prepared for a high-end enemy, what we call full spectrum. In this context, Russia and China are our most stressing competitors, as they've both developed and continue to advance military systems that seek to threaten our advantages in specific areas. We see them in the South China Sea, and in Crimea, and in Syria as well. In some cases, they're developing weapons and ways of war that seek to achieve their objectives rapidly before they think we can respond. Because of this, DoD has elevated their importance in our planning and budgeting. In my written testimony, I've detailed how our budget makes critical investments to help us better address these 5 evolving challenges. We're strengthening our deterrence posture in Europe by investing $3.4 billion for our European Reassurance Initiative, quadruple what we requested last year. We're prioritizing training and readiness for our ground forces, a very important matter emphasized very appropriately by the chairman, and reinvigorating the readiness and modernization of our fighter aircraft fleet. We're investing in innovative capabilities like the B-21 long-range strike bomber, microdrones, and the Arsenal plane, as well as advanced munitions of all sorts. In our Navy, we're emphasizing not just increasing the number of ships, which we're doing, but especially their lethality, with new weapons and high-end ships, and extending our commanding lead in undersea warfare, with new investments in unmanned undersea vehicles, for example, and more submarines with the versatile Virginia payload module that triples their strike capacity from 12 Tomahawks to 40. And we're doing more in cyber, electronic warfare, and space, investing in these 3 domains a combined total of $34 billion in 2017. Among other things, this will help us build our cyber mission force, develop next-generation electronic jammers, and prepare for the possibility of a conflict that extends into space. In short, DoD will keep ensuring our dominance in all domains. As we do this, our budget also seizes opportunities for the future. That's a responsibility I have to all my successors, to ensure the military and the Defense Department they inherit is just as strong, if not stronger, than the one I have the privilege of leading today. That's why we're making increased investments in science and technology, innovating operationally, and building new bridges to the amazing American innovative system, as we always have, to stay ahead of future threats. That's why we're building what I've called the force of the future, because as good as our technology is, it's nothing compared to our people. And in the future, we must continue to recruit and retain the very best talent. Competing for good people for an all-volunteer force is a critical part of our military edge, and everyone should understand this need and my commitment to meeting it. And because we owe it to America's taxpayers to spend our defense dollars as wisely and responsibly as possible, we're also pushing for needed reforms across the DoD enterprise, and we need your help with all of them. From further reducing overhead and excess infrastructure, to modernizing and simplifying TRICARE, to proposing new changes to the Goldwater-Nichols Act that defines much of our institutional organization, as I intend to do shortly, to continuously improving acquisitions. And on that subject, I want to commend this committee, and especially its leaders, for your continued dedication and strong partnership with DoD on acquisition reform. We've already taken important strides here, such as last year's reforms to reduce redundant reporting requirements and documentation. And as you're looking to do more, so are we. Chairman Thornberry, I know you laid out new proposals on this last week. Some of what you're proposing would save us critical time in staying ahead of emerging threats. That's very important, and we appreciate that. It's extremely helpful. And I know this is just a draft, and I appreciate that you put it out there for discussion. In that regard, I have to say that in the current draft, there are some things that are problematic for us, so I'm also hopeful that we can continue to work with you on your proposals to ensure that DoD has the flexibility needed to apply the principles in your work to addressing all the diverse acquisition challenges we have to solve for our warfighters. I appreciate your willingness to hear our ideas as well, including ways to make it easier for program managers to do their jobs, and involving the service chiefs more in acquisition decision-making and accountability. And I look forward to working together as we have before. Let me close on the broader shift reflected in this budget. The Defense Department doesn't have the luxury of just one opponent, or the choice between future fights and current fights. We have to do it all. That's what this budget is designed to do, and we need your help to succeed. I thank this committee again for supporting the Bipartisan Budget Act that set the size of our budget. Our submission focuses on the budget shape, making changes that are necessary and consequential. We hope you approve it. I know some may be looking at the difference between what we indicated last year we would be asking for and what the budget deal gave us. A net total of about $11 billion less is provided by the Bipartisan Budget Act out of a total of almost $600 billion. But I want to reiterate that we've mitigated that difference and that this budget meets our needs. The budget deal was a good deal. It gave us stability. We're grateful for that. Our greatest risk, DoD's greatest risk, is losing that stability this year and having uncertainty and sequester return in future years. That's why going forward, the biggest budget priority for us strategically is Congress averting the return of sequestration to prevent what would be $100 billion in looming automatic cuts so that we can maintain stability and sustain all these critical investments I've been speaking of. We've seen this before, and that same support coming together is essential today to address the security challenges we face and to seize the opportunities within our grasp. As long as we work together to do so, I know our national security will be on the right path, and America's military will continue to defend our country and help make a better world for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. General Dunford.
Chairman Thornberry, Congresswoman Davis, distinguished members of the committee, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to join Secretary Carter and Secretary McCord in appearing before you. I'd like to begin by echoing Secretary Carter's comments on the loss of Staff Sergeant Carden. His family, the 8 other Marines who were injured this weekend, and the victims of this morning's attack in Brussels are in our thoughts and prayers. I'm honored to represent the extraordinary men and women of the Joint Force. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civil servants remain our single most important competitive advantage. And thanks to your support, the United States military is the most capable fighting force in the world. I don't believe we should ever send Americans into a fair fight. Rather, we must maintain a joint force that has the capability and credibility to assure our allies and partners, deter aggression, and overmatch any potential adversary. This requires us to continually improve our joint warfighting capabilities, restore full-spectrum readiness, and develop the leaders who will serve as the foundation for the future. The United States is now confronted with challenges from both traditional state actors and non-state actors. The Department has identified 5 strategic challenges, and Secretary Carter has outlined those. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea continue to invest in military capabilities that reduce our competitive advantage. They're also advancing their interests through competition with a military dimension that falls short of traditional armed conflict in the threshold for traditional military response. Examples include Russian actions in Ukraine, Chinese activities in the South China Sea, and Iran's malign influence across the Middle East. At the same time, non-state actors such as ISIL and al-Qaeda pose a threat to the homeland, the American people, our partners, and our allies. Given the opportunity, such extremist groups would fundamentally change our way of life. As we contend with the Department's 5 strategic challenges, we recognize that successful execution of our defense strategy requires that we maintain credible nuclear and conventional capabilities. Our strategic nuclear deterrent remains effective, but it's aging and requires modernization. Therefore, we're prioritizing investments needed for a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent. We're also making investments to maintain a competitive advantage in conventional capabilities, and we must further develop capabilities in the vital and increasingly contested domains of space and cyberspace. As the Joint Force acts to mitigate and respond to challenges, we do so in the context of a fiscal environment that's hampered our ability to plan and allocate resources most effectively. Despite partial relief by Congress from sequester-level funding, the Department has absorbed $800 billion in cuts and faces an additional $100 billion of sequestration-induced risk through fiscal year 21. Absorbing significant cuts over the past 5 years has resulted in our underinvesting in critical capabilities. And unless we reverse sequestration, we will be unable to execute the current defense strategy, and specifically to address the challenges that Secretary Carter outlined in his remarks. The fiscal year 17 budget begins to address the most critical investments required to maintain our competitive advantage. To the extent possible, within the resources provided by the 2015 Bipartisan Budget Act, it addresses the Department's 5 challenges. It does so by balancing 3 major areas: investment in high-end capabilities, the capability and capacity to meet our current operational demands, and the need to rebuild readiness after an extended period of war. In the years ahead, we'll need adequate funding levels and predictability to fully recover from over a decade of war and delayed modernization. A bow wave of procurement requirements in the future include the Ohio-class replacement, continued cyber and space investments in the long-range strike bomber. It will also be several years before we fully restore full-spectrum readiness across the services and replenish our stocks of critical precision munitions. And I know the committee has heard from the service chiefs on the specifics of that readiness recovery. In summary, I'm satisfied that the FY17 budget puts us on the right trajectory, but it will take your continued support to ensure the Joint Force has the depth, flexibility, readiness, and responsiveness that ensures our men and women never face a fair fight. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McCord, I understand you do not have an oral statement. Is that correct? Thank you. Appreciate you being here today as well. Mr. Secretary, I think you're exactly right to condemn the attacks in Brussels, and you're exactly right to express sympathy for the victims. I think the question for, especially for this committee, but for the American people is, okay, what are we going to do about it? And in last year's bill, Section 1222 asked the administration to provide a strategy for how we were actually going to implement the President's stated desire to degrade and destroy ISIS. And as I mentioned, it's been radio silent. We have heard not a word from anybody. Now, to be fair, it's not just a matter for the Department of Defense. It's not just the military who will defeat ISIS, and the requirement in law was not just directed to the Department of Defense. But do you have any idea when we might see a strategy on how to beat ISIS?
Well, thank you, Chairman. And you're right. The Brussels attacks reinforce our need to accelerate the defeat of ISIL. We have a strategy for doing so. I'll describe it in a moment. The strategy document, the strategy report you're asking for, its delivery is imminent. It's a DOD plus others document, and we'll get that to you. But the strategy in brief is this, and then I'll connect it to the Brussels attacks. I was describing the campaign in Iraq and Syria. which we're accelerating, and Chairman and member, we're looking for more opportunities to do so. We've found opportunities. I expect us to find more opportunities in the future. We want to accelerate the defeat of ISIL in Iraq and Syria. Why? Because that's what I call the parent tumor of the cancer. That's where it started. And if we can expel ISIL from Raqqa and Mosul, that'll show that there's no such thing as an Islamic State based upon this ideology. So that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. We also need to destroy ISIL in the places to which it is metastasized around the world. And to get to the Brussels attack, that reminds us, and the report will also, by the way, that important as the military effort is, essential as it is, and committed as we are to that in the Department of Defense, the chairman and I and everybody else, it is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We need the intelligence, we need the Homeland Security, we need the law enforcement, and so do our partners, because of the kind of thing you saw in Brussels this morning. So we have the strategy. We'll produce the strategy, the report based on that. We need your help. And in that connection, finally, if I just may add a note, Chairman, appeal. We have before this committee and 3 other committees a reprogramming request that is relevant to our ability to carry out the campaign in both Iraq and Syria. And as you know, according to the rules, if we're going to do a reprogramming, we have to ask the permission of this committee and 3 other committees. We've done so. So far, we've gotten different answers from everybody, which is fair enough. But if you can help us, we need to get across the finish line quickly. We've got to be agile in the defeat of ISIL. And that means we need to be agile in this matter of reprogramming as well. Appreciate your help in that regard. Let me ask the chairman if he wants to add anything about the overall strategy.
Well, Mr. Secretary, on the reprogramming, I think all of us would feel better about a reprogramming if we knew what direction we were going, which is why in last year's bill, the request was, okay, tell us how you're going to do this. And then, as you want to move money around and a variety of other things, I'm sure there'll be lots of support. But until there's some sort of coherent direction on how we're going to beat these guys, then I think it's harder to have that confidence. Let me just ask you one other thing, because I know other members will want to continue to explore that topic. You were exactly right, as was Chairman Dunford, in expressing sympathy for the loss of the Marine over the weekend. I'm getting an increasing number of questions about the troop cap levels, which exist in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Because as I understand it, there are some people who are subject to the troop caps, and then there are some people who rotate in for a short amount of time that are not subject to the troop caps. And the argument is that if you're rotating people in every 30 days or whatever it is to keep below the troop caps, then the people who are rotating in are not going to have time to get acclimated to the environment and may be at increased risk. The other argument I've heard is that when you have these artificial troop caps, you don't bring in the force protection that you would in other situations where you're not subject to those troop caps. So I guess my question to you is, do you believe there is reason to be concerned that these artificial troop caps in Iraq and in Afghanistan lead to increased risk for our service members?
Thanks, Chairman. First of all, with respect to the troop cap numbers, there's been no change in that regard, and you're right. There are people who are temporarily assigned, and this has been true for here and in Afghanistan for some time. They, under the caps, are counted differently, as you well know, and I can't go into it in detail here, where each and every unit is, but we do provide that to the committee, and so you can have that not in this setting. But to get to the substance of what you said about everybody, I'll get the chairman to comment on this too, everybody that is in Iraq is properly trained for the mission. That included the Marines there. And to force protection, that was in fact their mission. What they were doing was helping to protect the staging area near Makmur where we are and our coalition partners are helping the Iraqi security forces, some of the brigades that will constitute the envelopment force of Mosul. So that's part of the preparation for operations against Mosul, and precisely what they were doing was protecting that position. That was a necessary task. We're very sorry about the loss of this member in accomplishing that necessary task, but it was necessary because we needed to position them there, and these Iraqi security forces, who in the end will be the force that both takes and holds Mosul, they need to be trained and they need to be positioned near McCord. That's what was going on there. Let me ask the Chairman if he wants to add anything.
Chairman, your specific question about have we compromised force protection or other critical capabilities as a result of the force gap, I can tell you we haven't done that. And I've routinely engaged Lieutenant General McFarland and the commanders on the ground and asked them, is there something else you need? In fact, I'll see General McFarland again this afternoon and have the same conversation with him. To date, we haven't had any request that we've gone to the President with, and this is now over the last several months, for capabilities that has been denied. We're in the process right now of bringing forward recommendations for increased capability as a result of operations in Mosul, Raqqa, and elsewhere, so we can maintain the momentum and accelerate the campaign. But at this time, Chairman, I don't have concerns that we've not put forces on the ground that have impacted either our force protection, CASEVAC capability, or any of those things. We build a force from the bottom up with those in mind.
Well, I appreciate that, General. To me, it makes no sense to put artificial troop caps in any place. The question is, what does it take to do the mission? And I know this, just as I trust you to continue to follow this question, it's something that the committee wants to continue to follow as well. Last question, General, you heard some of my comments earlier about the readiness issues. Let me just offer a handful of other quotes on the record. General Neller said our aviation units are currently unable to meet our training and mission requirements, primarily due to ready basic aircraft shortfalls. General Milley and General Allen have testified less than 1/3 of Army forces are at acceptable levels of readiness. The readiness of the United States Army is not at a level that is appropriate for what the American people would expect to defend them. Last week, Secretary James, less than half our combat forces are ready for a high-end fight, and she later said the Air Force is the smallest, oldest, and least ready force across the full spectrum of operations in our history. Do you agree that we have a significant readiness problem across the services especially for the wide variety of contingencies that we've got to face?
Chairman, I do, and I think those are accurate reflections of the force as a whole. From my perspective, there's really three issues. There's the resources necessary to address the readiness issue, there's time, and then there's operational tempo. And the readiness challenges that we're experiencing right now are really a result of several years of unstable fiscal environment as well as extraordinarily high operational tempo. And it's going to take us some years to get out of the trough that we're in right now. What I'm satisfied with in this year's budget, FY17, is that we have met the requirements from a fiscal perspective that the services have identified for readiness. In other words, we can't buy our way out of the problem in FY17 with more money because of the aspect of time and operational tempo. I think the service chiefs probably also identified to you, Chairman, and the committee that in the case of the Army, the Navy, and the Marine Corps, it'll be sometime around FY20 before they address their current readiness challenges, and the Air Force is projecting horizon as late as fiscal year 28 before they come out of the challenge. And part of that is, again, operational tempo and resources and time, and some of it is what you saw in your recent visit down in the 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing, where depot-level maintenance has been backlogged. What you saw in the Marine Corps, I think, reflects in some part what you'll see in all the services, perhaps not to the same degree as Marine Aviation, but that same dynamic exists in each one of the services and reflects in the comments that you heard before the committee.
Well, I'll just say I think it's important for us and for y'all to continue to not only watch this issue, but really understand down deeper what's happening. You know, statistics are one thing, but you talk to these folks eyeball to eyeball, and the sense of frustration and concern is very evident. Thank you for your answers. I yield to Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you both for your for your extraordinary service to our country. I wanted to go back for a second to the questions that I raised in the opening statement, because I think we grapple with that here, and I know that we're going to be talking about OCO funding down the line, overseas contingency, and the Bipartisan Budget Act as well. You stated, as you just did, I mean, equipment is one thing, but well-trained personnel and leadership are quite another, and that the latter do take time. And so we need to work this as best we can. In the statement I offered, you know, what you have said quite I think clearly, that modernization and readiness over force structure is where your trade-offs are going in the budget process. And I'm wondering, would the department's trade-off choices become harder or easier if OCO needs are supplemented by base budget requirements within a bipartisan budget compliant top line? I mean, is that helpful? What poses the greatest risk, really, to our national security, providing funding for base budget requirements at the level requested by the President, or providing funding for near-term OCO requirements, at least initially, at levels lower than requested? Well, one of the things that I was just going to say, Mr. Secretary, that I know you've said so well here is that, you know, under the best of all possible worlds, we would be funding the base budget at the level that we need, including OCO for very specific overseas contingencies. But that's not exactly where we are right now. And we have to be certain that other budget requirements, whether it's in Homeland Security, whether it's in wherever that may be, are also working well within our budget as we move forward. So,
well, you're right. Generally speaking, the base and the OCO budgets have different managerial purposes. The base budget is for things that are enduring, meeting enduring requirements, and OCO is for the variable costs associated with urgent, ongoing operations. That's still largely true, but it's not completely true. And to get to your question, one of the ways that we were able to mitigate the difference between what we last year planned to in our 17 budget and what the bipartisan budget agreement provided us was to use some OCO, about $5 billion net. And that is one of the things that brought down that risk associated with that difference. But it's only one way that we did that. We also benefited, by the way, from fuel costs, different inflation indices than we expected. And what we did with the remaining, to get to your point, what do we do to accommodate the Bipartisan Budget Act, that $11 billion change? We took it out of some procurement accounts, some aircraft, and some smaller programs. We took it out of MILCON. Let me tell you what we didn't do to accommodate that difference between the BBA and what we planned on last year. We didn't take it out of military compensation, any of our service members' compensation. We didn't take it out of readiness, out of the readiness recovery plans that the chairman has referred to. We didn't take it out of any of our major acquisition programs, stop any of them, break any multi-year contracts, and we didn't change any of our end strength numbers, targets, as a result of that. So that's how we accommodated the $11 billion, and that's the reason why the chairman and I say that part we managed to mitigate and bring forward a budget that meets our needs. Our worry is in the future. And with the $100 billion cuts that we face, and wherever they come from, in the accounting, that is the biggest strategic risk to us.
General Dunford, did you want to?
Congresswoman, the thing I'd probably add is you talked about modernization over force structure, and frankly, this year as we focused on capability enhancements, it was really as a result of 3 or 4 years of not addressing those and realizing that we were losing our competitive advantage against the peer competitors that I mentioned, the Russias, the Chinas, and even in the case of North Korea and Iran. And we knew, were we not to make those capability investments this year, if you look out 3 to 4 or 5 years, we would not be where we needed to be. So from my perspective, it isn't so much force structure over modernization. It's trying to get within the top line that we have the right balance between force structure and capability in today's force with sufficient investment in tomorrow's force to make sure that the force that we have today and that I'm proudly able to say is the best in the world is the best in the world in 2021 and 2022. And that's why I think the Secretary directed us this year to make a slight course and speed correction in terms of how we're investing our funds to get better balance between today's fight and tomorrow's fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Mr. McCord as well. I think what's maybe understandable in terms of the defense budget isn't necessarily understandable to folks that are looking at their budgets in other departments, and that's partly where the rub comes.
I think that's correct, Ms. Davis. And just one point on your earlier question, to get a marginal maybe increase in OCO this year without knowing if we can count on it in the future is pretty suboptimal for us in terms of being able to plan and use that money as effectively as we might. If we knew that the requirement would be taken care of permanently, that's much better for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to take you in a different direction, a totally different subject. I want to personally thank you and especially thank Secretary Robert Work. I have spent 13 years of my life trying to clear the names of 2 Marine pilots who crashed a V-22 Osprey in Marana, Arizona on April the 8th of the year 2000. It's your Secretary Carter. I want to thank Secretary Work publicly because he did something that I could not get the Marine Corps to do, and that is to look openly and evaluate the information that we had put together, working with experts. Many of those were Marine pilots themselves. There were aeronautical engineers who came to the aid of saying that at the time, if you remember, that Secretary of Defense Cheney wanted to scrap the V-22 program. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of push by the Marine Corps to make sure that the V-22 was their plane for the future. When I reached out and found Secretary Work, he spent the time to meet with me and spent several hours, days, researching all the information that we had put together. A team of experts helped me to put it together. And then he came back with his evaluation that the record needed to be corrected, that it was unfair to Colonel John Brow, pilot, and Major Brooks Gruber, co-pilot, whose wife brought this to my attention in the year 2002. And I want to say today that you have brought peace, Secretary Work and you have brought peace to the families of John Brow and Brooks Gruber. And I believe sincerely that John Brow and Brooks Gruber are now resting in their graves, and they're resting peacefully because of what you and Secretary Work have done. This has gotten national attention, and I've talked to Trish Brow, I've talked to Connie Gruber. They're hearing from Marines who are now retired. They're hearing from friends from years past who said, hallelujah, that now the truth is known, and those 2 pilots will not take the blame for what was unfair at the time of the accident. So I want to thank you publicly and thanks Deputy Secretary Robert Work, because the truth is now known that they were not responsible for that accident. It was a combination of many, many factors. So I will give you a chance to respond, and then I will yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that. I'm glad that the families are able to be at peace now, and I will pass that on to Secretary Work, my excellent Deputy Secretary. I'm pleased to hear you say that about him, but I'm not surprised.
Thank you, sir, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I think you have an obligation, certainly a right to respond to something that former Deputy Director CIA said yesterday in response to a question. He said that ISIL is winning, and he said based on two assessments. One, although there's less caliphate territory, they seem to be spreading their influence beyond the caliphate territory. And then, of course, in direct reference to the attacks in Brussels. So I wanted to get your assessment about whether you think ISIL's winning, and if not, your assessment of the former Deputy Director of CIA's comments.
I'm not familiar with those comments. And as far as the campaign is concerned, I'm confident that we will defeat ISIL. And that we have the momentum of the campaign in Iraq and Syria. I gave you some of the details about that, and we're prepared to give you much more. We're doing more. We're actually looking to do yet more than that. And I'm confident that that will result in the defeat of ISIL in Iraq and Syria. And as I said, that's necessary. It's not sufficient, as the attacks in Belgium suggest. Let me ask if the Chairman wants to add anything to that, but ISIL will be defeated. We have a strategy to do that. I'm sorry the report hasn't gotten to you, but will shortly, and I'm confident that strategy will succeed.
Congressman, first, I'm not complacent about the threat of ISIL, and I recognize the spread of ISIL, particularly over the last 15, 18 months, transregionally or globally. With regard to Syria and Iraq, in October, I appeared before the committee, and at that time, I think it was fair to say that ISIL had the momentum. Since that time, they not only have less territory, they have less resources, they have less freedom of movement. We've reduced the number of foreign fighters. They're actually able to flow back and forth, and frankly, I think their narrative is less effective than it was some months ago. But this is a long fight, and I'm confident in telling you that we have the momentum today. I'm also confident in the end state that Secretary Carter identified, but this morning was another reminder that there's a long fight ahead, and it will require not only the military effort to deny sanctuary to the enemy in Syria and Iraq, to limit their freedom of movement, to build the capacity of regional partners, which is what we're doing, but it will require much greater cooperation amongst intelligence organizations from nations. There's over 100 nations that have foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq, with over 30,000 foreign fighters. So the cooperation of all those countries in the intelligence organizations, law enforcement officials, as well as the military coalition that we put together in Iraq, in Syria, and conducting operations elsewhere is all going to be critical. And it is going to take some time before we get there. But I am confident, at least today, that we have the momentum in Iraq and Syria, and we're increasingly taking actions outside of Iraq and Syria to make sure that we also keep pressure. As we've tried to keep pressure on Iraq, on the enemy simultaneously across both of those countries, it's going to be necessary that we do the same thing transregionally.
I'm going to move to the budget and talk about taking the long view. Unfortunately for you, you don't get to be here for the implementation of the long view to help us deal with the actual long view. And we've been having this debate and a little bit, and Ms. Davis touched upon it. And I'm just wondering how you envision affording these incredibly expensive programs that we have outside, not just outside of this budget, but outside of the 5 years and even 10. And nuclear modernization is one of those, but it's not the only one, where we're going to be called upon, if we have the fortunate success of staying here, to resolve and solve.
Well, we can afford all of those. We wouldn't have started them if we didn't think we could complete them. However, we are assuming when we do so that we will continue to have budget stability. If there's instability or sequester, as I said, and I think the Chairman just said, we're going to have to fundamentally reassess our ability to meet our needs, not only in the long run, but in the short run. And you're right, it'll be future Congresses and future administrations who carry that burden. I hope that they continue to give us budget stability as we've had now for 2 years. That's what the country needs. That's what our department needs. That's what, by the way, what every department trying to administer programs needs. But if we snap back to the sequester cuts, we're going to have to reconsider all of these programs. We need them, and therefore we need the stability. Chairman?
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Mr. Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you gentlemen for being here. General Dunford, it's always an honor to have the top uniform officer in the United States before us, and so I'm going to direct my questions to you since I only have 5 minutes. And I'd like to first ask you a question we've been asking all of our officers before us. Did you submit your written remarks to anyone for approval or review other than someone under your direct command before you had to come before us?
Congressman, I did submit my remarks to the Office of Secretary of Defense as well as Office of Management and Budget. No changes were made in my written remarks as a result of that review.
Now, one of the things that I heard you just say in response to the chairman was you said that your readiness concerns were based on an unstable fiscal environment. And one of the concerns I always have, we wrestle with in this committee, is simply this. When we look at whether strategy is driving the budget or the President's budget or whether the President's budget is driving strategy, the question is which one of them are predominant? Is it the strategy that's predominant in driving the President's budget, or is it the President's budget that is predominant in driving the strategy?
Congressman, I think this year it's fair to say that within the top line that we were given,
and for the last several years, just as a rule, is it the strategy that's more predominant in driving the budget or the budget that's more predominant in driving the strategy?
Yeah, I would say if you go back to the last few years and particularly look at sequestration in 2013, the fiscal environment has had a bigger impact.
So then when we've constantly asked people that have come in here, many people from the Pentagon saying that the budgets are in line with the strategy, then what you're saying is basically that it's been the budget that's been driving our strategy.
Congressman, if I can give you just a little bit of a nuanced answer. Here's what I'm confident in saying. Today, we have a defense strategy. It calls for us to defeat an enemy, to deny another adversary, to protect the homeland, as well as deal with violent extremism. I'm confident in FY17 that we'll be able to do that.
All right, then let me ask you this. I don't mean to cut you off. I only have 3 minutes. I'm looking at a document here that was signed by President Obama on January 3rd, 2012 for the defense guidance. And he says specifically in here, this guidance was requested to guide the spending over the coming decade. Then I have it signed on January 5th, the defense guidance by Secretary Panetta. And this is what over and over again people have been coming in here pointing to and saying this has been directing their spending. And then we had in 2014 the Quadrennial Defense Review. Over and over again, people have sat where you are sitting and have said that this has guided the spending of the Department of Defense. Has the Department of Defense been following the President's guidelines and been basing their spending on these two documents?
We have, Congressman, but what we've been doing is living year to year and deferring modernization that's going to cause a bill in the out years.
And I understand that. Now, let me ask you this, because these documents are based on certain assumptions. Did either of these two documents account for the rise of ISIL?
They did not.
Did either of these two documents assume that U.S. forces will no longer be in Iraq and Afghanistan?
They did not.
And in fact, we do have forces still in Iraq and Afghanistan. Did either of these two documents assume that we would reset our relationship with Russia and that we would be able to cooperate with them?
We did not foresee Russia's current actions in those
documents. The assumptions made for these two documents were not correct with the Russians.
With regard to Russia, that is correct.
Did either of these two documents count for China's aggressive behavior in the South China Sea?
Not to the extent that we've seen it, Congressman.
Now, with that, wouldn't it be fair to say if the assumptions that these documents were based upon were invalid or wrong, that the strategy would also have been invalid or wrong?
The strategy, it needs to be refined, and we're in the process of doing that. That's correct.
And also, General Odierno, when I asked him that question right after these were put into place, he said, we struggle to even meet one major contingency operation. It depends on assumptions, and I believe some of the assumptions that were made are not good assumptions. They're unrealistic and very positive assumptions. Yet these are the two documents that helped guide the President's budget in 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017. So wouldn't it be fair, General, for us to say that instead of just the unstable physical environment, that a big part of the reason we're in the current situation we're in is because the President's strategies were based on faulty assumptions?
This year, Congressman,
I'm talking about the last several years leading up to this. This year's budget's not putting us in the situation that the Chairman talked about.
If you're asking, did we foresee the current conflict with ISIL and Russia?
I'm asking, wouldn't it be fair to say that rather than just physical instability, that the reason we're in the problem is because of a faulty strategy? And with that, Mr. Chairman, I know my time's up and I yield back.
Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both witnesses for your service and your testimony today. I just have a couple quick questions. And Secretary Carter, Admiral Stavridis, retired admiral, Under Secretary Stackley, Secretary Mavis, have all appeared over the last couple of weeks, and we've talked about this question of the long view of the undersea fleet, which Admiral Harris and General Breedlove said at this point are kind of playing zone defense out there because of what's happening in the Pacific and the North Atlantic. Again, this is a good budget in terms of investing, as you point out, in shipbuilding or submarine building. But down the road, you know, there's a possibility that we're going to see a dip at probably the worst possible time. And so I guess the question is, do you agree that this is an issue that we need to work on, as Secretary Stackley has promised, so that we again, are able to keep our eyes focused on the long view in terms of that emerging challenge?
I do agree with that. Our undersea capability is a critical strength of the United States. We need to keep that strength and extend that strength. And I think the biggest issue we're going to face beginning in the 20s is the beginning of the Ohio-class replacement. And that is the building once again of SSBNs as well as attack submarines, SSNs, which we're doing today. And we've been stressing now for several years we're going to need some consideration of the need to recapitalize our undersea nuclear deterrent, because that can't be done at the expense of the rest of the undersea fleet, or we will erode our dominance. So that's a major issue that's looming in the 20s.
Thank you. And again, we think, you know, we found some ways to use different authorities, multi-year procurement, et cetera, to try and, again, maximize every efficiency to help in that effort. And again, Secretary Stackley emphasized that when he appeared before the committee. I'd like to shift gears for a second. First of all, I want to thank you for your comments regarding what happened in Brussels yesterday, and also noting that Brussels is actually the home of NATO. And, you know, there's a lot of work that takes place in that city, which is extremely important in terms of our national defense. Yesterday, the frontrunner for the Republican nomination told the Washington Post NATO was set up at a different time. I think NATO as a concept is good, but it's not as good as it was when it first evolved. In your testimony, I counted 3 instances: the fight against ISIL, the continuing efforts in Afghanistan, and also the European Reassurance Initiative, where NATO is absolutely at the center of our military strategy and operations. Is NATO relevant today? I guess we need to ask that question, given what's out there in the public domain.
Well, let me begin by saying the following, and I've said this before, and I'm going to say this again and again in the course of the year. I recognize that this is an election year. I will not speak to anything that is in the presidential debate. I believe that our department has a tradition of standing apart, and I very much value and respect that tradition, and so I am going to, with great respect, decline to answer any question that is framed in those terms, and by the way, also not have General Dunford or any of our, especially of our uniformed officers.
So I agree, and I respect that. And I guess the question I would ask then is that the European Reassurance Initiative, that funding, again, is going to flow through the NATO structure. Yeah, I mean, that's not you know.
It is. Yeah. It is. And securing our NATO partners from particularly Russian aggression is the principal purpose of the European Reassurance Initiative. With respect to the counter-ISIL fight, the NATO allies as individual countries are members of the coalition. The question has arisen whether NATO as a group should also be a member of the coalition, and that is being discussed right now with NATO. The reason for that being that NATO has some force generation capabilities that no individual country has, and that's the reason why the question arises whether it can play a role in the counter-ISIL fight.
Thank you for those answers.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Dunford, looking back at the 2012-2014 strategic guidance and defense reviews, What specifically has changed in the geopolitical world? And based on those changes, is it safe to say that we need to look at, following on what Mr. Forbes said, recalibration or resizing of our current forces?
Congressman, thanks. I would say the most significant changes, one has been Russia, two has been the rise of ISIL. We talked about the behavior of China in the South China Sea, and certainly the capability development of North Korea have all been a concern. Iran remains a concern, but quite frankly, the trajectory that they've been on was predictable even as those strategy documents were written, and so I think we accounted for Iran. But in the four other areas, we've seen either capability development or behavior or a combination of the two that have significantly changed the operating environment over the last few years.
And I do think it's important that the American people understand the guidance that was used to set the size and shape of the force. And the current guidance, as you've already stated, said to defeat a regional adversary and deny another aggressor in another region. However, in your written statement, you stated that, quote, the joint force will be challenged to respond to a major written contingency, unquote, and that, quote, capability and capacity shortfalls would be particularly acute if the force were called to respond to a second contingency on an overlapping timeline. So I would think that this might suggest that there's a significant risk that the joint force wouldn't even be able to execute a single major contingency operation. Is that true?
Congressman, our assessment is we can meet the requirements of a single contingency. There is significant risk in our ability to do that. Certain capability areas would be particularly stressed, but we can accomplish the objectives, albeit with much more time and probably casualties than we would like.
The guidance calls for sufficient forces to execute, as you just said, two contingency operations, defeating one aggressor and denying the other. So, you know, if you put it in a real-world scenario, could the current force today defeat a North Korea and deny Russia while at the same time defending the homeland?
Congressman, we would be challenged to do those three things. Our assessment is we can do that, again, but it would take more time, particularly in the case of North Korea. It would take more time, and we would see more casualties than we would want to have.
So you had, the department has cut the end strength and the force structure on the assumption that it did have the sufficient forces to carry out the assumptions that are there. So given the current strategic environment, will the department need to revisit its force size and guidance?
Congressman, just to be clear, in terms of cutting force structure, my perspective is, you know, the force structure is one element, but what's most important is that the force structure that we have has the proper resourcing to be well trained and well equipped. And so what I believe we've done inside the budget is we've got the force structure that's affordable within the top line that we have, and we can achieve the balance between the training, the resourcing, the modernization, the infrastructure support, and the force structure. All those things have to be combined. And so, you know, my assessment is that we're trying to get the balance right as opposed to saying that the current force structure is absolutely the best force structure we could have.
Thank you. Yield back.
Ms. Songus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our guests. It's always good to have you before us. And I think today's tragic events in Brussels really are a stark reminder of the many challenges that you all deal with every day and that we're here to support you with. And I especially appreciated both your comments on the need for budget stability as you deal with the challenges of today, but also with the need to look forward. Because as we all know, and I remember a previous chairman, Ike Skelton, always commenting upon that we plan for today, but we never quite know where the next challenge is going to come from. And in the world we live in today, it's clear that they can come from many, many different places. But Secretary Carter, I also wanted to thank you for the emphasis you've placed on this year's budget on research and development, really knowing that it's key to maintaining our technological edge, that in this rapidly changing environment, we've got to maintain our investments. And as many on the committee know, defense-related research and development has faced a disproportionately large cut over the past several years, far more than has been required under the Budget Control Act. So I was especially encouraged to see that the department will be investing in 2 new facilities at MIT's Lincoln Lab. As you know, the lab has provided the department with breakthrough advancements for decades, and I thank you for your support of the lab's revitalization and the important role that it plays in the Massachusetts innovation ecosystem. It's part of something much larger. But I'd like to turn to the issue of sexual assault prevention and response in the military. I've been troubled by a number of stories, including a series in the AP and recent stories in the Washington Post about senior officer sexual assault cases, which have called into question the transparency of the military justice system and the service's willingness to pursue allegations against officers. I understand that the Military Justice Review Group's proposal that was shared with this committee by the Department gives the Department 2 years to come up with a design for an online system of tracking cases and 2 years to implement that system. And I would encourage the Department to work with all speed to make the military justice system as transparent as possible. And I hope the Department will make this system open to survivors and the public as you move ahead. But we have all heard the troubling accounts of victims of military sexual assault who are later retaliated against, those who seek recourse through the system of justice. Some 62% of victims have experienced social or professional retaliation, according to the Department's own survey data. And I've also read the Judicial Proceedings Panel recommendation to implement a standard retaliation reporting form. It is imperative to me that the Department track these incidents and hold those responsible accountable, key to maintaining the unit cohesion and all that is part of readiness as well. So I have my questions, our Secretary Carter. What is the Department doing to ensure service members who report sexual assault aren't retaliated against?
Thank you very much for that question. And sexual assault is unacceptable anywhere in society, but it's particularly unacceptable in our military. And the reason is this: the profession of arms is based upon trust, and it's based upon honor. And sexual assault erodes both honor and trust, and for that reason is completely unacceptable at any level. Moreover, to get to your point, as we study that question more and take more action, and I'm not happy with that there's sexual assault in the military. I am very pleased that we are taking it on frontally, and we need to do that, and we need to learn how to do better. The two issues you raised are places where we are learning how to do better. Retaliation, for example, was something that I think it's fair to say in our department, we did not appreciate the importance of that phenomenon until the last couple of years. And so we are having to take that on board. That retaliation creates additional victims to the victim of the sexual assault. And this can be peers, and it can be others who are part of giving the victim their care, their the options and the response that they deserve. And so it's an important new ingredient, and we are trying to get on top of that. And finally, with respect to transparency, we're committed to that. You're right. We have made a commitment to you about greater transparency in this matter, and I intend for us to carry that through. Thank you for raising this.
Thank you. I've run out of time. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. With the attacks in Brussels, it's another reminder we're in a global war on terrorism. It is continuing. And I just want you to know that I have faith in you, and we're counting on you to protect American families. And part of that is not forgetting 9/11. This is a continuing war. We will be in it for quite a while, but your service, I know I appreciate as a grateful dad of 4 sons who have served in the military under y'all's command. General Dunford, as Chairman Thornberry has mentioned, we have serious concerns about the state of the Marine Corps aviation. Marine Corps aviators and maintainers at the Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort, South Carolina, tell us how they have had to cannibalize parts from museum aircraft to get their current fleet in the air. They don't have the parts. They don't have the people. They're not getting the training. Furthermore, General Robert Neller, has testified that there aren't enough aircraft to even meet our training and mission requirements. I'm very concerned that if they had to deploy tomorrow, they'd be sent into a fight unprepared and ill-equipped. How are we addressing this potential or reality of an inability to respond to near-peer adversary or multi-adversary engagement? Beyond Marine Corps aviation, what else is at risk?
Joe, before you answer that, can I just thank you very much, acknowledge your comments, and especially thank you for the contribution of your sons.
Well,
thank
again,
you, Congressman.
Hey, we're in this together, and but the American people need to know it's a global war on terrorism. 9/11 must not be forgotten, so thank you.
Congressman, quickly go back to how we get in a position we're in marine aviation, as well as, frankly, as I mentioned, across the Joint Force, there's similar stories I could point out. Part of it was deferred modernization, so we're flying aircraft now that are very old. Part of it was back in 2013, we went through sequestration. We had a backlog of depot-level maintenance. That's caused the availability of ready basic aircraft and so forth. So these issues exist throughout the Joint Force, and part of what we're arguing for now is stability and funding, managing the operational tempo, and getting the appropriate resources is going to be what we need to get out of this trough, and it's going to take some years before we're able to do that.
And we will be working with you. And Secretary Carter, last week, Admiral John Richardson testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee that Iran had violated international law earlier this year by boarding sovereign U.S. vessels, detaining 10 U.S. sailors, and seizing an estimated 13,000 pages worth of information from laptops, GPS devices, and maps. Would you agree with Admiral Richardson's assessment? If so, would you please let us know what subsequent action has been taken to rectify this brazen defiance of international law?
I absolutely agree with Admiral Richardson. The actions of the Iranians with respect to our sailors was unprofessional. It was outrageous. And I just caution you all, since Admiral Richardson is looking into the circumstances of this matter, but when you see something on television, you're looking through the lens of Iranian TV and Iranian propaganda. Those sailors didn't deserve that. We would never treat people in that manner. And to get to your question, I can't say much about it, but at the time, we were preparing to protect our people as soon as they were seized. And we only stood down that effort when we were assured that they were going to be returned to us safely. But it was outrageous treatment. I think Admiral Richardson has stressed that, and I would second that. But also, I want to commend him on the treatment of the sailors. They're back home. The Navy did what it needed to do, which is, first of all, take care of their health and welfare, and is now learning the full circumstances of that. He has not completed his review of that, so I don't know what his consequences are of that. But this much we know, which is that is not behavior that we would have exhibited in the reverse circumstance.
I also want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your efforts to promote public-private cooperation in cybersecurity. But a challenge we have is recruiting and training. What are we doing to prepare for the continuing cyber war?
Well, thank you for that question. You're absolutely right. The critical thing in cyber is people. Good people. We're spending more money on it. We're making big investments in it, but that's not the key. The key is, are we able to get the good people to flesh out our 133 Cyber Mission Force teams, which, as you know, is what we're building up at Cybercom and all the other service components. The key is people, and we're doing better at attracting and retaining skilled technical people. I'll be up at a physics class at West Point, as it happens tomorrow, seeing some of our wonderful people who are being technically trained in their cyber center there. But in addition, let me say that building bridges, which I'm trying to do, we're all trying to do, between our department and the technology community is critical. Historically, the United States has drawn upon the great strength of this nation, whether it's satellites or missiles or the internet itself. And we need to keep doing that. And I'm committed to doing that because that's part of the future. And the last thing I'll say is just a pitch for the role of the National Guard and the reserve component in this regard. Right. I was up in Washington State a couple of weeks ago. There's a reserve unit up there that it consists of people who work at top-notch companies like Microsoft all day on network defense. And then in their guard duty, They're defending our networks. It doesn't get any better than that. A citizen soldier coming in cyber. So there are lots of ways we're trying to make sure we have good people, but we are able to. But that's the key: is good people in cyber.
Thank you.
Mr. Takei.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Carter, I'd like to talk about the Rim of the Pacific exercises, or RIMPAC. In your letter last year to Senators McCain and Reid, you stated that you believe that China's participation in RIMPAC would advance cooperative approaches to common security challenges, increase transparency and mutual understanding, and integrate China into a cooperative forum. You also say that you may modify our defense engagement decisions based on evolving circumstances. My question is, have you recently evaluated China, and have you made any changes to the invitation to the PLA Navy to participate in this year's RIMPAC?
We're constantly evaluating our relationship with China and China's behavior, including in the South China Sea, where I emphasize we have very serious concerns about their aggressive militarization there. They have an invitation to RIMPAC, and we will continue to review that. But you might say, what's the logic for having them there in the first place? Our strategy in the Asia-Pacific is not to exclude anyone, but to keep the security architecture going there in which everyone participates, and that's what has led over 50 years to the rise of Japan, then South Korea, then Taiwan, then Southeast Asia, and now, yes, China and India. We're not excluding China from that security architecture in which America plays the pivotal role, and we intend to keep playing that pivotal role. That's what the rebalance is all about. China is, however, self-isolating. Its behavior is isolating itself in the region. That's why all these partners are coming to us and saying, can you do more with us? So not just big exercises with lots of parties like RIMPAC, but we have the Japanese investing more, the Australians investing more, the Philippines just inviting us once again to work with them more closely, even Vietnam, India. So Chinese behavior is self-isolating and driving many countries to want to do more with us, and we're doing more with us. But that's not the way China is going to continue to benefit, as it has now for several decades, from the security system and the open system that we, the United States, have underwritten now for many decades.
Okay, so if China builds a runway on Scarborough Shoal Reef, PACOM Commander Admiral Harris assesses that Beijing will have total access across the South China Seas. Secretary Carter, is China conducting or preparing to conduct reclamation at the Scarborough Shoals, which is only 120 miles from Subic Bay in the Philippines, where our Navy regularly operates? And would you say that this behavior is consistent with U.S. objectives and the regional security environment?
Well, Congressman, we're concerned about that prospect. And is it consistent? No, it's not consistent. It's the kind of behavior that we will react to in our own military posture and deployments, and all the regional partners will react to. So it will be self-defeating and self-isolating for China. So I hope they don't do that, but we're prepared for that eventuality should it occur. But no, it's not a good thing for them to do that, and they shouldn't. And by the way, I just say, just to be fair about it, that our policy is that no one ought to be militarizing these features. There are these disputes over maritime claims in the South China Sea. Our view isn't to take sides on them. Our view is that everybody ought to resolve those peacefully and not militarize those features, China and anyone else who's done that. But China's done it by far more than anybody else.
Thank you. And I do agree. It is not consistent with U.S. objectives. And like you say, no one should be militarizing that area. So my question then is, why then should we reward China with their aggressive behavior by including them in an event meant for allies and partners? China's behavior is the polar opposite, as you mentioned, of U.S. objectives in the region, and that's why I submitted a proposal to the NDAA that would prohibit China's participation in RIMPAC this year. I hope you and your department will reassess this situation and follow suit. Do you have any comment? Briefly, we have 10 seconds.
No, we are constantly reassessing that. I gave you the logic for the invitation in the first place, and we'll continue to reassess it in accordance with your letter.
Thank you.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, General Milley stated before the committee, quote, that less than 1/3 of the Army forces are at acceptable readiness levels to conduct sustained ground combat in a full-spectrum environment against a highly lethal hybrid threat or near-peer adversary. Obviously, this statistic is undoubtedly alarming and illustrates that the risk associated with a less-than-ready military force is unacceptable. All too often, we speak about military risk in terms of numbers and percentages as opposed to more real and tangible consequences. When asked a similar question last year about risk, then Chief of Staff Army General Ray Ordinero made clear that direct correlation existed between increased risk and loss of lives on the battlefield. Put plainly, Ordinero stated that people would die. While I apologize for my frankness, it's critically important that our colleagues in Congress and the general public clearly understand what is meant when you say risk. We're currently in the throes of our debate on the budget. There are those who continue to say we can accept increased risk, we can lower the costs, we can continue to accept sequestration or cuts. General Dunford, would you please help us better understand what you mean when you say risk? Is there a direct correlation between risk and loss of lives on the battlefield? And also, is there a direct correlation between risk and winning? Knowing that we now have issues with Russia, China, North Korea, and certainly ISIS, could you give us an understanding of how the word risk translates? Thank you.
Congressman, I can. First of all, there is a correlation between risk and casualties. And when I talk about risk against our objectives, I'm talking about how long it will take and how many casualties we will suffer. Those are the two elements of risk that I refer to. You mentioned sequestration, and I would tell you what the risk of sequestration is. The risk of sequestration, and I'm talking now the $100 billion that still looms out there, means that we would have to go back and actually rewrite our strategy, and I'm talking about the ends of our strategy. So when you talk about winning, there is a correlation also between our ability to win against the current adversaries that we've identified, the peer competitors that we've identified, and sequestration. And my assessment is that we will not be able to deal with the 5 challenges that Secretary Carter and I outlined in our opening remarks, the Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and violent extremism. Were we to go to sequester-level funding, I can't imagine us being able to satisfactorily deal with those 5 challenges, and, by the way, the challenges that we can't foresee.
Secretary Carter, when you were here last year, one of the things that you said was that it would be so important to get a 2-year budget deal. Many of us in Congress, including myself who voted for it, believed we had a 2-year budget deal. We believed that we'd be looking this year at the budgetary process with a fairly firm 574 commitment to base budget funding, which would result in stopping the cuts that the Department of Defense has been put to. But when we received the President's budget, the President indicated that there were increased overseas contingent operations funding that he would need for his operations, $3.4 billion for Europe, additional dollars for ISIS. And rather than putting those on top, meaning that they're additional things that the President would need to do, he took that out of the base funding of the Department of Defense. Now, we're having in Congress to debate putting those dollars back. And again, it was unexpected because that was not part of the 2-year budget deal that you advocated for and that we voted for and that we all thought we were operating under. Could you please tell us what the consequences are of the cuts that will happen to the base budget of Department of Defense if we accept the President's budget? Because clearly there are things that you're going to have to not do that you'll get to do if we put that money back.
Well, the President's budget reflects the bipartisan budget agreement. The numbers in the budget are the numbers in the BBA.
Secretary Carter, I know you know that we completely disagree with you. I mean, Congress's expectation is that you had a base budget of 574. I don't think you would have supported a 2-year budget deal that would have had a cut to the base budget in year 2017. And my question is not really what's the deal. My question is, what are you losing? Because you're obviously losing something from 574 with the reduction that the President has taken of about $13 billion out of the base budget for OCO operations.
We're going to have to agree to disagree about that, about whether we budgeted to the BBA, because we believe we did. However, to answer what I gather is part of your question, namely, what did we do about the difference between what we said last year we intended to request this year and what we requested this year? I addressed that earlier. That was the $22 billion difference that, because of OCO and some other economic adjustments that went our way, like fuel prices and so forth, ended up being a net of $11 billion. And I explained exactly what we did to adjust and mitigate risk associated with that $11 billion. We cut a lot of minor procurement programs. We scaled back some of our aircraft buys. We took it out of MILCON. That's how we accommodated the $11 billion. We can tell you in detail how that was done. And I also explained what we didn't do. We didn't go into military pay to make up that difference. We didn't go into the readiness recovery plans that the chairman has described and that are so critical to restore our readiness, including full spectrum readiness for the Army and the other services. We didn't cancel any multi-year procurements or other major acquisition programs, and we didn't change any of our force structure targets, number of ships, Army end strength, or anything like that. We did what we did. We've described what it is. We believe that we were able to mitigate that risk, and that's what we did. Our biggest risk going forward, I'll just say it again, we've said it many times, the biggest risk to us strategically in our defense is a return to sequestration, a collapse of bipartisan budget agreement. And that is our biggest concern.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, last week we were able to listen to testimony from Acting Secretary of the Army Murphy and General Milley. And Secretary Murphy said, to continue this line of questioning on risk begun by Mr. Turner, that he said something to the effect of this budget places the Army at high risk. And prior to that, General Milley had made that connection explicit between risk and the loss of the service members' lives who we will put in harm's way. We reduce risk, we reduce that loss of life. So couldn't be anything more serious or grave for us to make a decision on. My question for you is that level of risk comparable in the other service branches? And what is your guidance to us as a committee going into the NDAA as a Congress that might look in the near future at supplemental funding to further mitigate that risk in this upcoming budget year?
Well, first of all, let me completely associate myself with what Acting Secretary Murphy and General Milley said. That is our highest priority for the Army in this budget, is readiness. They both made that clear. I concurred in that, and that's why the Army's readiness recovery plan is fully funded in the budget. Now, what does that consist of? And it gets back to the question earlier about full spectrum. In order to recover full spectrum, remember, where we're coming from here is an Army that was working extremely hard in Iraq and Afghanistan to meet the rotational needs of a counterinsurgency battle. And they were being trained for that. Now they are trying to restore their training to full spectrum for the other problems that we highlighted among the 5 that we're highlighting in this budget. To do that, they need to pass through their training ranges, and those high-level training ranges have a certain capacity. We're filling that capacity, but it's going to take some time for them to come out of it. And it's not going to just take time, it's going to take budget stability. That's why I keep coming back to the need for budget stability. And then the last thing in your question are the other services have comparable readiness issues. They're all different, but they're comparable in the following sense. all are trying to make long-term plans to get better in readiness. In the Marine Corps, it's particularly aviation, as the chairman has pointed out. In the Navy, it's principally a maintenance issue, and they're working very hard on that. In the Air Force, it's very importantly, and I think the Air Force leadership has indicated this, and the chairman mentioned this as well, the very high op tempo. The Air Force is trying to train for high readiness. At the same time, we're working them very hard in the counter-ISIL fight and elsewhere. So it's a little bit different in each service, but there's a challenge in each case, and that challenge, and we have plans to improve readiness, but they can't be executed if we're returned to budget to sequester levels.
Let me ask two follow-up questions to clarify. One, are we doing all we can do within this budget request to mitigate that risk? If not, what do we need to do? I'd be happy to join my colleagues and you in making the necessary changes. Two, my understanding is that risk is a term of art in terms of what the service chiefs submit to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And what I'd like to know is what we heard from the acting secretary and the chief of staff of the Army reflected in the other service branches, yes or no? If we have less risk in those others, are there more resources to pull to address the high risk, which I understand is a term of art, that was disclosed to us in the hearing last week?
Well, with respect to the first part, we have in this budget for 17 done everything that the Army wanted to do. I completely support them to get on the path to restoring readiness. It can't be done overnight.
This is as much as we can
describe, and so it's not a money issue; it's a money stability issue for the Army, and we've got to have that. And with respect to, does that translate into risk? Yes. Does it translate into risk for the other services? Yes, it does. And is that reflected in how the chairman and I and the rest of the Joint Chiefs and the service secretaries deal with risk in each service contribution to joint war plans and across joint war plans? Absolutely, it does.
Thank you. Out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, what priority do you assign to the Department's nuclear deterrence mission?
It is the bedrock of our defense. It's not in the news every day, thank goodness, but it is the bedrock of our defense. So having a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear deterrent is bedrock priority, and we give it the highest priority, and that's both in operating the force in the currently, and it was the subject was raised earlier about the need to keep a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear deterrent. The particular issue being raised was the submarine force in the future, where we'll change out the Ohio for the Ohio-class replacement. That is a necessary evolution. It's a very expensive evolution, but we have to do it because we have to retain a safe, secure, and reliable nuclear force as a bedrock.
Well, that leads me to my second question. Do you see the recapitalization of the nuclear deterrent as affordable in this budget environment?
As I said earlier, particularly you can see it right now that the submarine recapitalization in the decade of the 20s cannot be taken out of the rest of the Navy's shipbuilding budget without seriously crippling that shipbuilding budget. So we're going to need to make room for that. We've been saying that now for several years. You can see it. It gets nearer every year. But sure as shooting, we have to do that. And the reason is that the Trident submarines are aging out. It has to do with the stress on the hulls of submerging and coming up so many times, and they're going to have to be replaced. And that is the survivable part of our triad. It is absolutely essential. We're going to need to recapitalize it.
Great. General Dunford, are the Joint Chiefs convinced and unanimous that we must modernize the triad?
Congressman, I am. I have not talked to the current group of chiefs collectively, but previously, when I was a commandant in the Marine Corps and we met with General Dempsey, my predecessor, the Joint Chiefs unanimously subscribed to modernization of the triad.
Great. General, your predecessor undertook an assessment of the Russian violation of the INF Treaty. He concluded it posed a risk to the United States itself as well as to the security of our allies in Europe. Do you agree?
I do, Congressman. In fact, it reflected in the budget are capabilities to deal with just that threat.
Well, we have been waiting over a year to be briefed on the military options that you have in response to that. Can you assure me we'll get that from my staff, me and the ranking member of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, within the next 3 to 4 weeks?
Congressman, I or my staff will come over and see you soonest.
I'd appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to my friend and colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Klein.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. General Dunford, a couple of years ago I was in Afghanistan and you were the senior American commander there, and we had significantly more than 10,000 U.S. forces. In January I was back in Afghanistan. General Campbell was the commander there and was operating under a force management level of 9,800 troops. Now General Nicholson is on the ground there, and he is currently undertaking a review of the situation there to make his recommendations. If he were to come back after completing this review with a recommendation to change the force management level, I don't know who invented that term, by the way, but it bothers me a lot because it's a strategy by political numbers, but if he were to come back and say we need to increase that FML by some unspecified number, 1,000, 2,000, or something like that, and if he were to come back and say we need to lift the restrictions that we're operating under that says I can't train and advise and assist below the Afghan Corps level, and if he were to come back and say I need the authority to unilaterally target the Taliban and the Haqqani network, would you support those recommendations going to the President?
Congressman, first of all, General Nicholson is going to provide recommendations, and I know what the President has articulated as the end state. And I can assure you my recommendation, which will forward any recommendation that General Nicholson will make, will be benchmarked against my assessment of our ability to meet our objectives. That's exactly what I did when I was a commander on the ground and exactly what I do in my current position.
So you don't know whether or not you would support General Nicholson's recommendations if he came back with those that I just suggested?
What I would make clear to the President in making a recommendation is whatever capabilities I believe are necessary, and I can't speculate as to whether General Nicholson would ask for an increase right now, Congressman, but what I would say is if he came in and said these are the capabilities we need to accomplish the mission, and I agreed with General Nicholson's assessment, I would forward to the Secretary a recommendation that would include whatever capabilities are necessary for us to achieve the end state. Of that, I'm clear.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Let me just second that.
Thank you.
That's the way it works.
Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here this morning and for your service. Secretary Carter and General Dunford, both of you talked about the threat of North Korea in your opening remarks, and I appreciate your leadership in maintaining the Department's focus both on current and emerging threats in the Asia-Pacific. I think North Korea's launch of their short-range missiles demonstrated just yesterday how serious and important this threat is, which must remain at the forefront as we look at how and where we are placing and investing our defense resources. Obviously, representing Hawaii, this is something that we're keenly aware of as the threat from North Korea continues with their increased capabilities, as well as people on the West Coast who find themselves within range of their ICBMs. Secretary Carter, you discussed the ongoing consultations with South Korea's hosting a THAAD system. Can you give us an update on those talks, and can you also share the Department's commitment to continuing to increase and enhance our missile defense capabilities of the homeland? In particular, in Hawaii, we have a test site for the Aegis Ashore at the Pacific Missile Range facility. And I and others here on the committee are pushing towards operationalizing that to increase that protection.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the role that the Hawaiian facilities do play in allowing us to develop and test our missile defenses. And we are doing a number of things to react to and protect ourselves and our people from the North Korean missile threat. Let me just back up a minute and say, I talked about fight tonight on the Korean Peninsula. We're absolutely committed to that. Chairman and I pay attention to that every day. Again, that's not something that's in the newspapers every day, but our contribution to the defense of South Korea is very, very important and rock solid. On the missile defense front, well, we're doing things at all ranges. You mentioned Aegis Ashore. THAAD, and just to answer your question about THAAD on the Korean Peninsula, we are discussing that with the Koreans. We have agreement in principle to do that. And I should say the reason for that is to be able to protect the entirety of the peninsula against North Korean missiles of greater range. That's why we want to add THAAD to what already exists there, which is Patriot, both South Korean Patriot and U.S. Patriot. Finally, to the homeland, it is with the possibility of North Korea having the capability to range the United States with ICBMs that we began several years ago to increase both the number of our ground-based interceptor system and also its capability. So we're increasing the number of those interceptors from 30 to 44. We're improving the kill vehicle on the front end, and we're adding radars to that. So we're doing a great deal, but unfortunately we have to because we see, as you mentioned yesterday, the action of North Korea. Yeah. Let me see if the chairman wants to add anything to that.
I'd like to shift to both of your comments as well with regard to Ukraine and Russia. Much of the $3.4 billion for the European Reassurance Initiative goes towards military funding and training and so on and so forth. In particular in the Ukraine, obviously there are many challenges that they're facing kind of in their whole of government, but specifically within the military, we've seen time and time again how there is no tank-to-tank competition possible as Ukraine faces different threats coming from Russia. So can you speak to what kind of training we are assisting them with regards to unconventional or special forces tactics and guerrilla warfare, which can take a toll on what Russia is doing there?
We are doing that. That's part of the support that we give to the Ukrainian forces, both against what you might call symmetrical or traditional kinds of combat operations, and also helping them with this unique brand, but I'm afraid to say here to stay, brand of hybrid warfare that we've seen in eastern Ukraine. Let me ask the chairman to elaborate.
Congressman, on that issue specifically, we have currently 5 conventional Ukrainian battalions going through training and 1 special operations unit going through training. Their training cycle will complete in September. I recently received an update, probably assessed as some of the best, most effective training we provided to the Ukrainians to date, and that's both the Ukrainian and U.S. perspective. Much of that training is informed by Russian behavior over the last few years and lessons learned in terms of integrating unconventional warfare, information operations, cyber capabilities, conventional capabilities. So I believe we're addressing that in our training program right now that's taking place with Ukrainian forces. And this is Minister of Defense forces. Heretofore, we had trained just Ministry of Interior forces. This is the first cycle now of Ministry of Defense forces trained in these areas.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. General Austin, CENTCOM commander, said to the Senate Armed Services Committee that additional capability is going to be necessary to take Raqqa and Mosul, including additional U.S. personnel, intelligence, logistics, other advise and assist teams. Do you agree with General Austin on the assessment that additional U.S. troops on the ground in Iraq and Syria are going to be necessary to take Mosul and Raqqa, and will you support that? Personally, support that to the President?
I do. We already have. I expect us to do more because we're looking for opportunities to do more. So General Austin is right. And, of course, all this is in support of the Iraqi security forces, but it includes support to the Iraqi army, support to Sunni tribal forces, support for police training. And, by the way, it's not just U.S., but I've been getting coalition contributions as well. And as we assemble the forces to move on Mosul, we will be doing more. And when we've taken those requests to the President, as the Chairman said earlier, he has consistently granted those requests. And I expect there to be more in the future because we want to get Mosul. We want to defeat ISIL in Iraq.
We've got to have Raqqa as well. ABC's reporting
Yes,
that the
Raqqa
planning for
also.
Brussels came out of
Absolutely.
Raqqa. Let me pivot to something that's a little more mundane, but nevertheless important, and that's auditing.
Yes.
I worry at, but by the way, Michael McCord, thank you for the report from your group on where everything stands right now. I don't necessarily want to go into the details of that, but thank you for getting that over to the committee in response to the NDAA. Can you talk to us about transition to a new civilian leadership team next year and the impact that might have on the forward momentum with respect to getting this audit process done by the deadlines? I worry that the impact from, Leon Panetta started this deal, Hagel kept it up, Secretary Carter, you're full-throated in favor of it. Mm-hmm. Are there risks that a new civilian team might not have the same emphasis? And General Dunford, will you comment on the military's side of that issue as well?
I am absolutely fully in support of it, and I thank you very much for your persistence and your leadership in inducing us to do this. And I also want to thank Mike McCord and his whole team for their role in it. You ask about the future. My guess is that this will continue because the logic is quite clear, the necessity is quite clear. So I think that'll be clear to people who come after myself and the chairman. I'm pretty confident that will. It certainly should, and of course you'll have a role in helping remind them of this necessity. But there's a whole team behind this and all of our components, and I think they're committed to this work. They'll remain committed to this work. Chairman?
Congressman, I can speak from both my current perspective and as a former service chief. I mean, I would tell you, I really do believe that it's now part of our culture. And as you know, we've been at this now 4 or 5 years and worked pretty hard at it. And frankly, I think the uniformed personnel that are involved in the audit process and the civil servants involved in the audit process are fully committed to actually coming back over here and laying on the table a clean audit. I mean, that is a bar they have set for themselves, and again, I don't think the civilian transition that will take place this year is going to change the objective of the individuals who have been working so hard. And again, most of the folks that are doing the heavy lifting, they aren't going anywhere, and they're pretty clear about in their commitment to get this thing done.
Well, I appreciate that, and I hope our Senate colleagues during the confirmation process, whoever's doing that next time, will make that clear. And just to be sure, the the resources necessary to move this forward are in this budget. And the requests?
They are.
All right. General Dunford, did you want to comment on the need for additional U.S. troops to counter ISIL and actually defeat them in Mosul and
yeah,
Raqqa?
Congressman, I fully support the comments that General Austin has made and the Secretary has endorsed. We have from the very beginning said that we would recommend whatever capabilities are necessary to maintain momentum and achieve the end state. And I do assess that to be successful in both Raqqa and Mosul and beyond, we're going to need additional capabilities, and at the right time we'll be prepared to provide that recommendation to the President.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. You go back.
Mr. McCord, let me warn you, I promised Mr. Conaway we're going to do a briefing or hearing on the audit issue, and we'll be talking with you and the other folks about that, about dates for that. But it is something that Mr. Conaway is going to stay on our case till we see it all the way through, and I think a lot of us are committed to doing that. Ms. Berdallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As a representative from the Asia-Pacific area, I'd like to start out by expressing my sincere sympathy for the people of Belgium and for the family of the Marine killed this weekend in Iraq. I do know that Representative Takai already spoke on China and Representative Gabbard referenced North Korea. So on Guam, we are considered the tip of the spear in the Asia-Pacific region, and I know the budget request contains nearly $250 million for FY17 military construction projects. We are seeing tangible development, such as facility construction, take place. So I'm asking the Secretary Carter what role the administration sees for Guam in the broader strategy. Should Congress continue moving forward with construction on Guam? And additionally, it is often said that budgets reflect priorities, and you spoke to the Senate Armed Services Committee last week about continuing to support the Asia-Pacific rebalance strategy. So would you say that this strategy continues to be a priority of the administration?
I can, and the Asia-Pacific is where half of humanity lives. It's where half of the economic activity of the globe is. It's the single region of greatest consequence for America's future. We can't forget that. And thank you for everything Guam does with us and for us and as part of us out there. We are, Guam is a critical part of the posture improvements and strengthenings we're doing in the Asia Pacific. I mentioned the part that we're doing unilaterally. That's very important. Guam's a part of that. We do a lot with partners as well, and there's so much momentum out there. And now, part of that momentum is caused, as I mentioned earlier, by Chinese aggression. But we're determined to meet it, and Guam's an important part of that, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and you've done so much for us. I thank you for your contributions. Also, I have another question for either yourself or Secretary McCord. It is estimated that the Defense Department spends nearly twice as much on service contractors as it does on civilian personnel, even though they're often doing the same work. Nevertheless, the Department's budget request seeks to cut civilian personnel and increase spending on service contracts. In this extremely constrained fiscal environment, can we expect to see the Department leverage the clear cost savings found in civilian personnel versus contractors? Are we still waiting for a complete accounting of all service contracts that was mandated back in 2008, but we have still not received the report?
Thank you for that. I'll just say at the beginning, then turn it over to Undersecretary McCord. We are committed to reducing the strength, particularly of headquarters staffs, both civilian and contractor, and for that matter, military. That's where those numbers come from. And are we getting better at understanding how we're doing the spend for services contracting? Yes, we are getting better at that. The Chief Management Officer of the Deputy Chief Management Officer of the Department, along with Mr. McCord, work on that, and we're committed to meeting those targets. They're part of our budget outlook. If we don't keep working on tail, we're not going to be able to invest in the tooth. So it's an essential thing to do. And we ask Undersecretary McCord wants to add anything.
The contract.
Yeah, I would just add that, as the Secretary said, we have been instructions, both internal and from the Congress, to hold down civilian, to keep it commensurate with the drawdown in military, and we recognize that mandate. And as he said also, we are looking hard at service contractors. The DCMO, Mr. Levine, is leading an effort. In fact, all of us have to report. My turn is coming, I think, within the week to report to him within my own office, just like everybody else has to do, on what we're doing to review all of our service contracts to make sure they're still justified. And history has shown that you could just the sunlight of looking at that drives the cost down. You relook whether you really need everything that you're doing, and that's an important part of our efficiencies effort for this budget.
I only have a few seconds left. We still haven't received the report. Will we receive a report of some kind? This has been due since 2008.
We'll have to get back to you for the record of the exact status of the report. I don't have it at my fingertips.
All right.
But
thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Carter, General Dunford, Mr. McCord, thanks so much for joining us today. General Dunford, in the previous hearings that the House Armed Services Committee has held, there's been a lot of discussion about readiness, and obviously for all of us, the concern about returning to full spectrum readiness is at the very top of our list. I think General Milley put it best. He said readiness doesn't have a constituency. And I think that's why it's critical for members of the House Armed Services to make sure that we are the constituency for military readiness for our men and women in uniform. Tell me where we are with the current budget situation, with where we project to be with the proposal in FY17 on the path to restore readiness. I mean, we're right now just at the point of setting conditions to restore readiness. Tell us how far away we are and what milestones you expect to achieve in restoring full spectrum readiness.
Thanks, Congressman. With regard to 17, we took inputs from all the services as to what they needed in FY17 along their path to restore readiness, as you've outlined. And that was a priority for the Secretary, and so we fully resourced the service plans for readiness restoration, keeping in mind that we knew we couldn't get to where we needed to be in 17 because of the other elements associated with readiness recovery, one, operational tempo, the other, the aspect of time. So with regard to where are we relative to where we need to be, 3 of the services have indicated that FY20 or 21 would be where they would get to if we are not sequestered and we actually receive the resources we project to receive. The Air Force is a little bit outside of that because of the unique challenges they have, and I think some of the numbers I've seen are as long as 2028, somewhere between 2024 and 2028. So 3 of the services probably about 5 years away. One of the services maybe 7 or 8 years away from full restoration of readiness.
Gotcha. Let me get your perspective on one of the elements of that readiness restoration, and that is aviation readiness. And you know, when you paint the picture about full spectrum readiness, it's across the service branches. But one of the areas that really concerns me is the assessments that we're hearing about aviation readiness. And it starts with the Marine Corps and what they're trying to do to restore it. And Lieutenant General Davis, I think, is doing all that he can. It's a pipeline issue. How much can we do and how fast can we do it just based on capacity? But give me your perspective about where we are with aviation readiness across the service branches, and what can we do in the context of full spectrum readiness to get there as soon as possible also?
Thanks, Congressman. There's 2 issues. One is the state of the current aircraft that we have, and again, we had some difficulty with depot-level maintenance and so forth associated with the last few years, and so we're in a trough with regard to the readiness of the platforms that are in the inventory right now, what we call ready basic aircraft. And although the Marine Corps perhaps is the most extreme, each of the services has similar challenges with regard to ready basic aircraft for deployability, particularly those units that are at home station. We're confident that those units that are forward deployed have what they need, but those units that are at home station have a shortfall of ready basic aircraft. The path to address the maintenance issue, of course, is stable funding in the future, both for our depot level and also for our local level maintenance. The other issue is the modernization piece. Much of the reason why we're where we are is we deferred modernization, and so the aircraft that we're flying is in the inventory longer than it needs to be. So there's really 2 pieces of this that are not unrelated, but they both come together. So my assessment of what we need to do is, 1, we need to fully fund our depot-level maintenance and sustain the aircraft that are in the inventory. And number 2, we need to stay on path with the modernization plan we have to address the long-term issue, which will really see manifest itself out in 2021, 2022, and beyond.
I want to get perspective from both you and Secretary Carter as far as the concept of readiness restoration and looking at how do we get to the point that we need to be. And you bring up, I think, an extraordinarily important point. Readiness as a term of art has traditionally represented training, operation, and maintenance. But I believe it also should reflect the element of modernization, because I think that is directly tied to readiness. I want to get your perspective on where you see modernization as part of the list of elements that must be attained in restoring readiness.
Just for my part, you're absolutely right. Training, maintenance are important parts of readiness, but in some forces, and you mentioned aviation, the real answer is the replacement of an aircraft that is now so old that it's cost too much to maintain, or we're simply not able to maintain them at the levels that means so the guys don't have aircraft to fly. We're seeing that with respect to the CH-53 in the Marine Corps. I'm sure you're familiar with that. That's an example of it. Also, to take another Marine Corps example, with F-18s in the Marine Corps, the older versions of those. So modernization is a key part of restoring readiness. Chairman?
I'll be very quick. I think I'm out of time, Congressman, but what I would say is this. You know, I've talked about FY17 as being sufficient. It's not everything we needed, and I subscribe to what the service chiefs have said when they came in. But my greatest challenge as I look at the budget in the future is the bow wave of modernization that is going to come in 2019, 2020, 2021. We talked about the nuclear enterprise, but frankly, it's the whole inventory of joint capabilities. And we've had 4 or 5 years of deferred modernization right now. We've done the best we can to start to rebalance that in FY17. It took us years to get to where we are. It'll take us years to get out of where we are. But this modernization issue is tomorrow's readiness. I equate it to health and wellness. So today, you know, we're not as healthy as we'd want to be, but we can get the job done. We're not investing in the health of the organization today, which will result in some wellness challenges down the road, which will read readiness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to take a moment to also express my deep condolences and solidarity with our allies in Belgium, across NATO, and across the European Union. this morning's cowardly terrorist attacks were not only an attack on the people of Brussels, but attack against Europe and civilized people everywhere who condone such horrific acts of terror. Secretary Carter, in your written testimony, you lay out 5 evolving challenges that are driving the department's planning and budget. And I want to focus on the 5th challenge, countering terrorism overseas and protecting our homeland. In your written testimony, you also outlined 3 military objectives to defeat ISIL, and you say the 3rd is the most important, to protect the homeland. Again, with that in mind, please provide the specific steps the department is taking to coordinate with its interagency partners to protect the homeland, and what actions Congress needs to take to bolster those initiatives, funding, legislative. Additionally, you mentioned the development of DOD's trans-regional counterterrorism strategy. Could you describe the pillars of that strategy and how it complements current efforts to deny terrorists a safe haven from which they can train, plan, operate, and launch these kinds of attacks, for example, here in the homeland?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. I'll start and then ask the chairman to reinforce. You're right. Our mission of protecting the homeland, which we need to do at the same time we fight overseas to defeat ISIL, is one we share with the intelligence community, with law enforcement at all levels, and also with Homeland Security. And we work very closely with them. Through NORTHCOM, we have a command that actually has precisely that mission, which is to protect the homeland by working with other interagency partners. We do that. We have plans to reinforce them if they request it in an incident. We support them all the time with equipment, technology, intelligence, and so forth, and it's a two-way street. We work with them. It's a very smooth working relationship, and the chairman can elaborate more on that. One thing I want to particularly ask him to elaborate on is your second point about transregional. One of the things that I am looking at in connection with the so-called Goldwater-Nichols issue is strengthening the role of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the chairman in precisely this way, the trans-regional coordination. We have combatant commanders. They're excellent, but they're focused on particular regions. I look to the chairman, and he does an excellent job of this, of balancing resources and making sure that the different COCOMs are cooperating, both, and that's NORTHCOM and the other combatant commanders. Let me ask him to elaborate.
Congressman, to be specific, what we did back in November, we asked the Special Operations Command to take the lead, not from a special operations perspective, but because they did have connective tissue in each one of our combatant commands, and they were capable of doing this, to begin the development of a trans-regional terrorism plan and countering violent extremism writ large. We've been working at that now for a couple of months. We most recently had a meeting in the tank on Friday afternoon where I convened the Joint Chiefs and all of our combatant commands to look at this. Critical to that is having a common operational picture and a common intel picture across all of our combatant commands. So that's the first part. The second thing is having an assessment process that integrates what all the combatant commanders see trans-regionally into a single vision that the Secretary of Defense can see. And then, as the Secretary alluded to at the end of his comments, a process to make recommendations for the prioritization and allocation of resources across all the combatant commands, so that much like we're trying to provide pressure across ISIL in Iraq and Syria, we're trying to do that trans-regionally at the same time. So we are very focused on that. You asked a specific question about, what are we doing to improve our interagency, and I would add to that interagency and international cooperation, which is very critical. Within the interagency, we meet routinely now, and the Secretary and Secretary Kerry lead the effort. We meet routinely to do deep dives on issues like resourcing or foreign fighters or intelligence sharing. And with regard to our partners, we have a very promising initiative in Jordan right now where we have, I think we're up to 15 nations that participate in an information and intelligence exchange to help us just on the problem of foreign fighters. And so those kind of collaborative processes are really necessary. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of walls for us to break down in order for us to be effective, and that's what we're in the process of doing. And our trans-regional plan is designed not only to integrate our capabilities across the combatant commands, but also with our coalition partners. And this plan will be born with a coalition perspective in mind.
Thank you. I'm very interested in the Jordan initiative, and perhaps I'll have my staff follow up with your office if that's possible. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gibson.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the panelists. The attack this morning reminds us we're still at war with an evil, determined enemy that must be defeated. And, you know, earlier in the testimony today, we had discussion about restoring deterrence as well, peace through strength. And I'm interested in hearing first from General Dunford. The RAND Corporation has published a study, Limiting Regret, Building the Army We Will Need. And here we're talking about the ERI initiative. And RAND concludes that we're going to need 3 armored brigade combat teams and associated forces to restore credible deterrence. I'm interested to know whether or not you agree with that assessment, and if you don't, then what you think is necessary to restore that credible deterrence. And then for both the Secretary and for the Chief, I have a bill, a bipartisan bill, over 40 co-sponsors now, the Posture Act, which stops the drawdown for the Army and the Marine Corps. That's the total Army, the National Guard, the Army Reserve, and the active duty Marine Corps and the Marine Corps Reserve. Assuming that that would come with the necessary resources for operations so that we don't hollow out the force and the complement of modernization that goes with it. I'm interested in your assessment on how that would impact the risk that we currently have, given the fact that earlier in your testimony today, Mr. Secretary, you talked about where we are today was based on a series of assumptions which have changed. So how would this Posture Act, if enacted with the necessary resources so we don't hollow out the force, how do you assess that would impact the risk, and how might these additional land forces be arrayed to deal with things such as the ERI?
I'll start then for the chairman on the 2 issues. First, with the Armored Brigade combat teams, the chairman can elaborate, but, and I don't want to go into our operational plans here, but we are developing our operational plans for the defense of NATO territory against both ordinary attack and what I called earlier hybrid warfare. And we're developing those plans and the requirements that come from them. I'm not familiar with the particular report that you cite, but that is now a necessity as a consequence of Russian behavior, as I said in my opening statement. With respect to Army and Marine Corps end strength, the chairman can speak to that also, and I'm sure the chiefs have as well. But I'll just, both in the Army and the Marine Corps, their emphasis to me in the preparation of this budget has been on readiness. And they have end strength plans to come down from the levels that they were previously, and their priority is the readiness of the force, not changing those end strength goals. I concur with that. Chairman?
Congressman, we've made a down payment. You know, you talk about what do we need in Europe, and of course it's not just about Army forces, it's the aggregate of joint capability. In the ERI, I think you know that we have an armored BCT's worth of equipment, a division headquarters, engineering equipment, and other units that are part of our pre-positioned stocks. We also pay for a constant presence of another brigade combat team that'll be over there for exercises and assurance of our partners as well as deterrence. What the overall number is that we may have, you know, a year or 2 or 3 years down the road, you know, I couldn't speculate. I don't think the RAND study is wildly off base, but again, to me, it's a function of not just looking at Army presence in isolation, but looking at the aggregate of joint capability that'll do what we need it to do, which is assure our partners as well as deter. With regard to the end strength issue, Congressman, my greatest concern is, in fact, that we have balance in the force, and we have not only the right force structure, but we have the right capability. And you hit it exactly right. If we're going to grow the force, We need to make sure that the infrastructure supports that. We need to make sure that the manpower supports that. We need to make sure the equipment modernization supports that, and then the operations and maintenance dollars that will allow us to train that force as well. So all of those levers have to be adjusted at the same time. Otherwise, the force gets out of balance, and that's why our focus this year was on capability over capacity. The reason is we felt like we were getting out of balance, where we didn't actually have the right amount of training, the right amount of equipment in place to make sure the units that we had were at the highest level of readiness possible.
Well, thank you, General. And let me just say for my colleagues and for the American people watching at home, for the record, that we are on path to draw down our land forces to pre-World War II levels. We had General Milley here last week, and he describes the array and the mission set, and given the changes to the assumption as high risk, and given the fact that when you turn this off, it takes 3 to 4 years to actually get the combat readiness restored, I think this bipartisan bill, we need to summon the will, get the resources, and get it enacted. And with that, I know my time has expired. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today. And General Dunford, your statement warns of an expanding Iranian malign influence and increasing capability in the region. In your assessment, is Iran more or less capable today, militarily speaking, than they were the day the nuclear deal was signed?
Congressman, I believe that Iran was spreading malign influences, was capable of doing that before the agreement, and I think they're capable of doing it after the agreement. I haven't seen any measurable increase in their capabilities, but again, I am under no illusion about what Iran's intent is, what their capabilities are, or what their current level of activity is across the Middle East.
Have you seen any change in their behavior?
I have not seen any specific change in their behavior, Congressman, with the caveat that they were spreading malign influence before the agreement, and they continue to do so.
Absolutely. Now they have $150 billion to help them spread it. And if there has been no change in the behavior, then certainly my concern is that the world's not more safe, but less safe with them having that money. Just a couple of quotes from the President, if I may. Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity is not: a comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. The deal offers an opportunity to move in a new direction, a different path, one of tolerance and peaceful resolution of conflict. Another quote, September 10th of 15, this is a victory for democracy, for American national security, and the safety and security of the world. And then the budget that was presented, and I agree with the budget statement. Iran's malign activities in pursuit of missile technology continue to pose a threat to our interests and allies in the region. To combat those threats, the budget continues efforts to hold Iran accountable for its destabilizing behavior by advancing preparations, posture, regional partnerships, and planning to preserve the President's options for any contingency. So one statement, September, a budget statement 5 months later. Secretary Hagel, what is the Defense Department doing to mitigate what is a clearly growing risk from the Iranian ballistic missile program?
Thank you for that. And you're right. The nuclear deal with Iran was about their nuclear weapons program. And it, if implemented, and we'll know whether it's implemented or not, will keep them from having a nuclear weapon. That doesn't stop them from having other capabilities and exhibiting other behavior that concerns us. One of those is ballistic missiles. That's why we are strengthening our ballistic missile defenses in the region, in Europe, to defend our friends and allies there, our own forces there that are deployed there. That's why we have Aegis afloat. That's why we have Aegis ashore. That's why our other partners procure those same missile defenses from us. And that's why we help Israel with its defense against short-range rockets, both the Iron Dome system and the David Sling system. They're also, by the way, developing the Arrow system against longer-range missiles. We help them with that, too. So we're doing a great deal to in the missile defense area in that region. Chairman,
if I can quote James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, what he said to SASC on February 9th, Iran probably views the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action as a means to remove sanctions while preserving nuclear capabilities. General Austin, March 8th, 2016. We've not seen any indication that they, meaning the Iranians, intend to pursue a different path. Now, I think he is talking about with regard to their malign activities, not specifically with nuclear, with regard to General Austin's statement there. But just a few things that they've done since then, aside from what they did to our sailors. They've continued to test ballistic missiles. October 11, 2015, they tested a new generation of surface-to-surface missiles. The UN stated this test violated UN Security Council Resolution 1929. On November 21, 2015, they launched another medium-range missile. On March 8th of this year, Iran launched several missiles from multiple sites around the country. The Iranian general who commands the program stated, "The Revolutionary Guard Corps does not give in to threats." Secretary Carter?
With the nuclear agreement, and I said at the time that it was struck and hasn't changed our commitments in the Department of Defense at all. We remain postured and committed to defending our friends and allies, our own interests in the region, and countering Iran's malign influence in all of these areas. It's good if it's implemented, which it is being so far, at eliminating the nuclear danger, but for everything else, we remain full speed ahead and on course for what we were doing last year, the year before, and those programs are just building. Let me see if the chairman wants to add anything, but we have a major commitment there.
My time has expired, but I just don't understand why we wouldn't have included other threats in any type of deal that gave them $150 billion.
Gentleman's time's expired. Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to, if we could for a second, talk about our current rules of engagement and our theaters of operation. You know, I have service members that are leaving the military, and they're coming to me saying that this is dangerous. We are not able to engage in a way that will allow us to defeat our enemy. And I understand the need to try and keep down civilian casualties. I get that completely. But I have a concern that we're protecting our enemies more than we are those that we're sacrificing to try and save. And that's the real concern. You know, throughout our history, we have people that have given their lives so that others can live. And, you know, with what we see taking place, my concern is that every time we let an enemy go, because of our very restrictive rules of engagement, hundreds, if not thousands, of more innocents are killed. They become fatalities because of genocide. Are we really winning? And so I'd like you to address our rules of engagement that I'm hearing so many complaints about from our service members.
We assess and reassess them all the time, including on a strike-by-strike basis. So your question is very apt, very appropriate, and we try to balance those things. We do it every day, and we do it in a very practical way.
Mr. Secretary, when was the last time we changed them?
Geez, we modify them all the time. Let me ask the chairman to explain.
Sure. Congressman, if I could, I'd like to distinguish between rules of engagement and collateral damage. You know, those have been conflated a bit in some of the discussion. I've heard the same thing you have. And I want to make it clear on the rules of engagement, those are enduring. And any time one of our young soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines is in harm's way and there's a hostile intent and you can positively identify an enemy, they can engage. That hasn't changed. There's no restriction on their ability to do what must be done to protect themselves. With regard to collateral damage, we make an assessment virtually on every time we engage. And right now, we start with a baseline of 0 civilians. But I'm here to tell you, if we have a target that justifies an expanded view of collateral damage in a particular case, we'll make that adjustment. So to your question, when was the last time we changed? I can't assure you that it was this morning, but I can assure you it was probably sometime in the last couple of days where General Austin made a decision to expand the numbers of civilian casualties that might be incurred in a particular target, given the importance of that target. What we have tried not to do is make enemies of the very people that we're trying to protect in places like Iraq and Syria. And we've also tried to make sure that at the end of the day, we don't become the enemy. We're fighting with our values, and at the end of the day, 5, 10 years from now, when this war is over, it'll be because we won the war of values and a war of ideas, not because we dropped a bomb in one place or another.
I understand that's a very fine balance. You know, I personally would give my life so my family could live, if that's what it came down to. My other concern comes to, are we in any way, shape, or form trying to work out an international or system of justice for those that we detain? You know, we're not dealing with the Timothy McVeigh here with domestic terror, and we're not dealing with a World War II situation where at the end of the war we sign a peace treaty and return our POWs. You know, we're releasing people from Guantanamo, some are returning to the fight. Do we really have a formal system of justice? You know, we're a country of laws, and we have a system of justice, and I think that's an expectation, and I haven't seen us going in that direction.
Well, thank you. We have various possibilities for detention if we take a prisoner. There is law of war detention. There is detention by transfer to another country. We did that, for example, in the case of the Sayyaf raid and Abu Sayyaf raid, where the custody became the government of Iraq. Then we have the possibility of criminal prosecution in Article III courts, which has also been exercised by the United States, a number of convictions. With respect to Guantanamo, what you say is the reason why we're looking for, and I personally support this, a place to detain those people who are in Guantanamo Bay. Let me be clear about this. There are people in Gitmo that it will not be safe to transfer to another location. I won't sign off on their transfer to another location for just the reason you described. So for me, that's why we need an alternative detention facility for law of war detainees. We need to be extremely careful about that, and that's why I'd like to find an alternative location.
Well, I would also like to see a more clear system of justice rather than we could do 1, 2, or 3 things. But my time's expired. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. We certainly all greatly appreciate your service to the nation and over the course of your very distinguished career, so we thank you for your service. Secretary Carter and General Dunford, over the past decade, the Department has had to reconcile the reality of re-emerging great power competition with the size and composition of our own military today. Secretary, I highly commend and very supportive of your vision for the third offset strategy, and look forward to seeing how that unfolds, and look forward to being supportive as we make that transformation. Beyond that, as we evaluate the architecture of our future fighting force, what should the balance between a forward-deployed power and sufficient surge-ready reserve capacity look like across the services?
First of all, thank you for your support for our technology efforts, third offset, and so forth. It's an important part of planning for the future. And I said this is a budget that tries to turn a corner, and while dealing with today's threats, also look ahead 10, 20, 30 years from now, and particularly to high-end potential opponents that we haven't had to worry about as much in recent years. So thank you for your support for that. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question, I'm sorry.
Sure. Just saying that as we evaluate the architecture of our fighting force, what should the balance between a forward-deployed power and sufficient surge-ready reserve capacity look like across the services?
I'll start, and then maybe Chairman can pitch in. It's important to have forward forces because they're the first edge of the response to a crisis, number one. And number two, their being there is a way of working with friends and allies, so we don't have to do everything ourselves. So it's an important part of the building partner capacity capability. But what deters is the full weight of the American military that would arrive on the scene after those initial forces had engaged. And I think that's what we, when we talk about deterring opponents, what deters them is not just what's right there in front of them. What deters them is the full weight of the American military that will arise. And so our surge forces are a critical part of the deterrent, and no one should measure our deterrent capability by what we have forward presence. That's an indication, but it's not the whole story. Chairman?
Congressman, getting that balance right is dynamic, and to assure you, every year we gather up all the combatant commanders' requirements for both the crisis response and assurance mission, as well as what they need for a major operations plan contingency. And so we make adjustments annually to make sure that we get that balance right between those forces that are forward deployed, forward engaged on a day-to-day basis, providing us access, making sure that we are prepared to respond to crisis, and also making sure that the residual capabilities and capacities on the bench, if you will, are prepared for a major contingency. So when you ask what's the right balance, it's a constant process of evaluation to make sure we do exactly what you're suggesting we should do, which is get that balance right.
Thank you, both of you. Going back to the third offset strategy, and again, very supportive of that. I think technology, game-changing, and it's going to help provide us with the advantages that we need, especially on cybersecurity, and which is I've been a strong proponent on, and other technologies. But, Secretary, how do you believe we can best direct our investments and our policies to ensure that the progress that we've made toward achieving a third offset strategy is sustained into the next administration?
Well, I think in this and in other matters, the strategic logic behind our investments this year, behind this 17 budget, is intended to point the direction toward the future. So we've crafted it carefully, and I think that both the needs it highlights in terms of the 5 challenges and what we have put in motion, especially including these technology efforts, are so compelling that I'm confident that they'll continue into the future.
And Secretary Carter, I've been one of the biggest proponents of cybersecurity as a critical warfighting domain during my time in Congress, and I believe it's imperative that the services understand the cybersecurity requirements laid before them when it comes to much-needed DoD programs and weapons systems in order to avoid serious cost impacts and schedule delays. How are we managing cybersecurity at an enterprise level, and incorporating cyber technologies into program requirements sooner? And I guess we'll have to answer that one for the record. So
I will do so.
Secretary, if you would, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Walorski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and General Dunford, for being here. Mr. Secretary, I just following up on Representative Winstrop's question, but are you aware of any discussions to close the naval station at Guantanamo Bay or transfer it to Cuba?
I'm not, no.
General Dunford, same question for you. Are you aware of any discussions to close the naval station at Guantanamo Bay or transfer it to Cuba?
I'm not, Congressman.
Mr. Secretary, your department delivered a product in February entitled Plan for Closing the Guantanamo Bay Detention Facility. However, this document failed to address the specific elements required by the FY16 NDAA. Therefore, as this committee has previously stated, the requirement has not been met. In this document, there were 3 options outlined for handling future detainees. They were on a case-by-case basis. Number 1 was prosecution in the military commission system or in federal court. 2, transfer to another country for an appropriate disposition there. Or 3, law of war detention. Yet in recent testimony, senior Department of Defense officials testified that, and I'm referencing this article, Stars and Stripes, they testified there is a requirement for long-term detention, but, quote, they do not know where long-term prisoners would be housed, which I think this is very troubling testimony, Mr. Secretary, considering we currently do have a location. So my question is, prior to conducting an operation where capturing individuals is either intended or possible, do you have to determine which of these 3 options is appropriate?
Generally speaking, we do and have, and that has worked out. And with respect to the report, if I can just respond to that, and the question of location, we were not specific about a location, and the reason for that is this. We need the optimal location for a law of war detention facility will depend upon several things that we don't know right now. For example, we don't know whether the Congress is going to respond to this idea. If we can do it quickly, then we'll probably pick an existing facility and try to build on that. If
An existing
we have,
facility in this country, or?
Yes. If we have an alternative, if we have a longer period of time, we may build a new facility from scratch. It will depend upon the number of detainees that we have and that we plan for. It will depend upon the structure of the military commissions process, which is something which is set in statute, by the way. So the very reason that we have to discuss this to the with the Congress, and we submitted this plan because, let me be clear, it is forbidden by law to do this now. So we need your concurrence.
Oh, I understand. I'm very familiar with the law.
Without that, and the reason that the plan calls for a dialogue between us and the Hill is that we can't select the optimal design and therefore the optimal location, and therefore fully do the costing until that conversation has been had, because you guys have a say in the design parameters of the ultimate facility. But I hope you'll give it consideration. I've said, and I believe this, I think it would be good to put this on a path to being dealt with by the time the administrations change.
I understand, and I apologize for interrupting. I guess two things. You and I have talked about this for months, but two things. I think the American people look at this, as I do, as a very dangerous precedent that we're looking at potentially bringing these terrorists with blood on their hands have already killed Americans back to this soil, which I think is reprehensible. But secondly, we were just reminded again with this bombing this morning in Brussels that there is an active war on terror, and I've been sitting here 3 hours, and the first question the chairman asked was about strategy and things that were supposed to be, you know, handed over to the Congress in February, and they still haven't. And I look at this kind of the same thing, that, you know, we're still waiting for some kind of a detailed plan that the President said would be made available, and you have too. My question is this: is it possible that due to such factors as bureaucratic obstacles, delays in timing, inability to negotiate with another country, that an opportunity to conduct a capture operation would be lost? Or, in other words, would this issue of not being able to have a place for future detainees because of the President's desire to close Guantanamo and bring those terrorists here ever inhibit a question on these attacks that we're doing with ISIL and engaging with them, the issue of, like, let's not go there because we don't know and we don't want these long-term prisoners?
That's not occurred in my observation. Let me ask the chairman.
No, Congresswoman, and frankly, that'd be one of the first things that I would ask if we were asked to do something. Is that's going to be part of the decision making to go after an individual, is what's going to be the disposition of that individual.
And what if the answer comes back, because we know there's long-term situations now engaging, what if the answer comes back and says, you know, we simply don't know, or Gitmo, because Gitmo is an operation right now that is there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, obviously we're here in a day of tragedy. Tragedy for the Belgians, tragedy for the world. ISIS has now taken responsibility for the murders this morning. We had a Marine that was killed last weekend in Iraq. I know you feel that personally. We have a law that we passed called the National Defense Authorization Act. It required you to submit to the Congress by February the 15th a plan for defeating these people. I know you told the chairman that it was imminent. The statute says you shall do it by February the 15th. You are in violation of the law. When an average American is in violation of the law, there are consequences. Would you care to explain to the committee why there shouldn't be consequences for your failure to follow a law that was signed by your president?
Well, I already explained that report will be in front of you imminently. With respect
Mr.
to
Secretary,
the larger
that's
question.
not my question. The statute says you shall do it by February the 15th. Do you not agree that you are in violation of that law?
We are prepared. We are going to submit that report. It's taken some time.
I'm going to ask you again, do you not agree that you're in violation of the law?
We will have that report to you shortly, Congressman.
I don't think that's a satisfactory response. When we pass a law around here, it means something. Now, people's lives are at stake. You know that better than any of the rest of us.
Well, the people's lives are at stake over a report.
Excuse me for a minute, Mr. Secretary. It's not too much to ask that you comply with the laws that we pass and the President signs.
As the chairman,
it's not sufficient for you to say it's imminent. You need to give us a plan now. Let me ask you about another report. You're also required to submit, when the President puts forth his budget, a 30-year ship plan for the Navy. You didn't do that either. That's a statutory requirement. Why didn't you submit a 30-year ship plan?
I don't know about the 30-year ship. We have a number of these statutory plans. We work on them very hard. There are many, many, many of them, Congressman. Let me ask Mr. McCord if he knows the status of that particular one, the second one that the Congressman raised.
I believe that's in process also and is nearing completion.
Well, under the law, that was supposed to be submitted with the President's budget request. Now, the existing ship plan we've got calls for 52 littoral combat ships. You have not amended that plan. You've requested 40. The Secretary of the Navy has told us in this room he needs 52. He has told us there is no study to change that. Mr. Stackley, his Assistant Secretary for Acquisitions, says there is no Navy study or analysis that would change that. You have no 30-year ship plan to change that. Yet you've tried to unilaterally change it in the budget. What is your basis if you have no 30-year ship plan that updates the 52 request? And what is when there's no Navy analysis, what's your basis for reducing the ship request from 52 to 40 on the LCS?
The basis is this, and this is something that we decided all jointly, and that the joint requirement we're going to buy 40 and not 52 littoral combat ships. The littoral combat ship is successful. It's been good at what it does. It's better than the mine countermeasure ships it replaces. It's better than the coastal patrol craft it replaces, but 40 is enough. And the reason we made that decision is that we thought, we believe and we're convinced that the money is better spent on ships that are more capable. We're looking for more capable and lethal ships, as well as more ships in the Navy. And we also
Since the Navy has no analysis on that, where's your analysis? Do you have a report?
We did analysis in the course of our...
Where is it?
...of preparing the budget. We did a lot over the course of the last summer.
Well, shouldn't it be in that 50, shouldn't it be in that ship plan?
We can provide that to you. But the point I'm making is a very important strategic one, which is we need ships that are more capable and more lethal and more high-end. That's one of the themes of this whole budget. So exactly the point you're raising is one of the very themes of this budget.
If that's so important, why wouldn't you give us a new ship plan? Because your old ship plan, the one we gave us last year...
I'm sure the shipbuilding plan will reflect that.
You were supposed to give it to us when the President's budget was submitted. Now, you and your staff may not think these laws are important, but they are. People wonder why the people of America are angry right now. They're angry because people in Washington feel like they're above the law. And none of us, Mr. Secretary, I'm not above the law, and you're not above the law. Give us a plan for the Middle East, and give us some sort of analysis that's different from the Navy's analysis on reducing the LCS request from 52 to 40. And I yield back.
We will provide those reports.
Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. Secretary Carter, could you just prioritize? I know you have a lot of choices to make and priorities to make. Low, medium, or high, the fight against ISIS, the military fight against ISIS in the next 5 years? Okay, thank you. How about...
Sorry, I didn't have the mic on. It's extremely high.
How about the priority of ensuring that if we do send our troops into harm's way, that they have the best capability overhead for close air support, should they come under fire?
Close air support is a critical part of the joint capability.
Great. How about if we have an American who has to eject or is shot down or an isolated personnel and they need the best capabilities overhead for combat search and rescue to be able to get them out of there? Low, medium, or high?
Well, combat search and rescue is a must-have everywhere we have forces deployed. Let me ask the chairman.
No, just in general. That's just the context. I think you would agree high, right? So I'm pleased to see that you're choosing not to mothball any A-10s in this fiscal year. But I'm deeply concerned about the 5-year plan, based on you sharing that those priorities are all high. We've mothballed the equivalent of 4 A-10 squadrons since 2012. We have only 9 remaining, and there are actually less airplanes in them than they used to have. The squadron I commanded used to have 24, and now they're down to 18. They're currently in 3 theaters, South Korea, Europe, and in the fight against ISIS, and I think you saw that firsthand. I'm confused about some statements and really contradictions in the 5-year plan, so I just want to see if I can figure this out. The F-35 requirements document says that the A-10 will be replaced by the F-35. The F-35 is supposed to replace the A-10. That's part of the requirements document. We've highlighted over the last year, I have in many hearings, concerns about shortfalls. We need a fifth-generation fighter, but when it comes to close air support, the F-35 having shortfalls in loiter time, lethality, weapons load, the ability to take a direct hit, the ability to fly close combat and be able to survive, and their night capability and their digital targeting capability. Because of that, your Operation Test and Evaluation has agreed to do a fly-off between the F-35 and the A-10 as part of the evaluation of the F-35. Which we were glad to see, because we are concerned that this space is going to have increased risk until we see if there's a proven replacement. But in your budget, you say that the A-10s will be replaced squadron by the F-35s. So that seems to me that the outcome is being predetermined. That's my first concern. We're yet to have a fly-off. We think that's going to happen in FY18 or 19. Yet you are saying that we're predetermining the outcome, that the A-10s will be replaced squadron by the F-35. Similarly, we have the Air Force leadership, when asked in a March 3rd hearing, and then I followed up last week, basically said the F-35 is really not going to replace the A-10. That's going to be more the F-16 and the F-15E, which contradicts the requirements doc and contradicts your own statement. If you look at the Air Force's 5-year plan, they're going to put 49 A-10s in the boneyard in FY19, another 49 in FY20, 64 the year after that, 96 the year after that. Basically, they're getting rid of the A-10. But the fly-off isn't going to happen until at least FY18. We won't be able to see the outcome of whether we're going to have a decrease in capabilities until at least a couple of years down the line. So I'm just concerned about these contradictions. The Air Force recently is saying that manning is their challenge, that this is their newest excuse as to why they need to be starting to put the A-10 in the boneyard, talking about how they just don't have the manning. Yet, last we looked at, we've got hundreds of people that are playing the tuba and the clarinet wearing the uniform, as opposed to core military capabilities. If we really had a manning crisis, from my perspective, we would tell people to put down the tuba and pick up a wrench or a gun. But we're not at that place. So I'm just concerned with where we are right now and these conflicting statements. So I just ask you, General Dunford, do you think that if we put the A-10 in the boneyard before we have a proven tested replacement for these high priority missions, will there be a risk to American lives?
Congressman, what we need in the Joint Force is the ability to deliver close air support effectively. And we need, as you know, it's not just a platform issue,
Right.
It's a training issue and so forth. So as the advocate for close air support and joint capabilities, I absolutely believe that we need a transition plan and there needs to be a replacement for the A-10 before it goes away. There's no question.
So that means you don't agree with us putting it in the boneyard before we even assess whether the F-35 would replace it?
What I don't agree with is getting rid of a capability without replacing it. And what I can tell you without going into great length is we recently met with all the chiefs. General Welch was there to take a look at the issue of close air support as a whole and to make sure that we're looking carefully at the platforms that are being introduced, what capability gaps will exist, how do we mitigate those gaps, and and from that, if we can't mitigate the gap, how does that inform the program in the future? So I can tell you that the interest of Congress has generated quite a bit of interest inside the department. And again, as the proponent for joint capabilities, I can assure you I will look at this from a close air support perspective to make sure the Joint Force has the close air support capability that it needs to have.
Thanks. My time's expired, but I just want to say I believe we need a conditional-based replacement, not a time-based replacement, that we shouldn't be putting any more of these in the boneyard until the fly-off is done and AX is developed and we make sure that we're not putting more American lives at risk.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, General Dunford, first of all, thank you all for your service to our country. General Dunford, how would you assess our combined armed capability today that we've been involved in counterinsurgency warfare for quite some time, although we're down more to an advise and assist role. But I'm concerned about just the fact that we haven't trained for some time, and how would you do that? How would you make that assessment?
Yeah, Congressman, there's no question that over the course of almost a decade involved in primarily counterinsurgency operations, the Joint Force's ability to integrate combined arms at the high end eroded. We're probably about 2.5 years or 3 years into focusing on that once again. Are we where we need to be? No, we're not. And that's exactly why we're focused on both restoring full spectrum readiness as well as making sure our exercises regenerate the kind of capability that we had some 10 or 15 years ago, that we were all confident that we had 10 or 15 years ago.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary and General Dunford, I'm concerned that I would hope prospectively that we would take a harder look at shifting more capability to the Guard and Reserve, and also not allowing them to lapse in to being a strategic reserve and to somehow maintain them as an operational reserve. Now that, take a look at their training requirements, take a look at potentially mobilizing them on a periodic basis, even in a peacetime role, to maintain their effectiveness. But I think that we're not taking a hard enough look prospectively at being able to more cost-effectively maintain our capability, but to utilize the Guard and Reserve more. And I wonder if both of you could comment on that.
I concur with you that we need to do more thinking. We are doing more thinking. I think that the simple dichotomy between an operational reserve and a strategic reserve made sense in the Cold War. I think the reserve component proved its versatility in the course of the years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and is proving uniquely valuable in some particular areas. I mentioned cyber earlier. That's very important. That's not a niche. It's not exotic. It's a critical part of our future. And so I think being creative and effective about the use of the reserve component for strategic effect, but not as a strategic reserve in the old Cold War sense, absolutely. We are thinking that way, and we need to continue to think that way. Chairman?
Congressman, one of my responsibilities on behalf of the Secretary is global force management, and I can assure you right now, in virtually every place where we are, the Joint Force, the Guard and Reserve are fully integrated into that. And of course, as you know, the difference between a strategic reserve and the operational reserve is that we wouldn't typically be using them in a kind of to meet the kind of requirements that we're meeting today. But you can go to South America today. I was there last week. Guard and Reserve are down there doing partnership capacity. You can go to Africa. You can go to Asia. You can look at BCTs that are being mobilized to participate in operations, elements of BCTs to participate in operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I would tell you today the Guard and Reserve are fully integrated in meeting all of the commitments that the Joint Force has, and I would envision that to be the case in the future, not just because it helps to maintain effective Guard and Reserve, but because we actually can't meet our requirements without fully integrating the Guard and Reserve into our overall force management processes.
Well, thank you. I do think that there are, I mean, when I look at the personnel cost differences between an active duty soldier and a Guard and Reserve member non-deployed, that they're fairly extraordinary. And so whatever we can do, I think, to be able to save money but maintain capability, I think we really need to take a look at going forward. I think the last question, in your view, this attack in Belgium, is it a result of the fact that we are making gains in Iraq and Syria in terms of rolling back ISIS, and ISIS needs to maintain the narrative of being ascended in order to attract recruits and money from across the radical Islamic world, and that this is a way to maintain that narrative by striking outside their territory?
Congressman, I can't say whether this particular attack is a result of that, but we have always said, and we anticipate, that as we put increased pressure on the enemy in Iraq and Syria, and their narrative begins to erode because their freedom of movement erodes, the resources erode, and so forth, that they're going to lash out and conduct terrorist attacks. And so we would expect the kinds of things we saw in Belgium to be a result of pressure that they feel in other places. There's no question about it. They will balance conventional tactics, which we have seen from the enemy, with guerrilla tactics in places like Syria and Iraq when they're not as successful, with terrorist attacks around the world to maintain relevance and continue their jihad. There's no question about it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. If y'all will allow me, I've got just a couple of issues I want to touch on right quick. Mr. McCord, we've talked a lot about readiness and training and maintenance. It is true, is it not, that virtually all the money for training, for maintenance of aircraft and so forth is in the base part of the budget?
That's correct. The vast majority is, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Secondly, my understanding is, as y'all were putting together your budget request, over $5 billion of that request was $5 billion worth was savings inflation and especially fuel savings. Now, obviously, the price of oil goes up and down. And you have a very long period when you have to formulate your budget. My question is, as you look at it today, how do your assumptions on the price of fuel measure against the reality of today? Is it better or worse than you assumed?
It is better today. Are you talking most about FY16 or 17?
17.
For 17. The prices that we were directed to assume are higher than what are prevailing today. As you note, that fiscal year hasn't even started and won't start for some time, and will go a year after that. So there's a long time for these prices have to hold before such savings would actually be, realizable. But yes, they are lower today.
Well, I just am a little concerned that there are assumptions built in the budget, and nobody knows what the price of oil is going to be, although it has been going up some in recent days. But as you point out, this didn't even start until October 1st. I was just wondering how it measured up. 10 U.S.C. 153 requires that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs provide a risk assessment to Congress by February 15th. We heard from the service chiefs that they have provided that input to the chairman. My understanding is it's been done and it's sitting in OSD somewhere. Y'all have any clue about when that might be coming?
Chairman, I can answer that. We did complete it some time ago. What we wanted to do was bring the chiefs together in the tank to discuss it with the Secretary. We did that a week ago Monday. And so we now have that to the Secretary, and that should be coming over right away. I mean, it is complete. We worked on it pretty hard this time, Chairman, and what you'll see is a different organizational construct. We try to take a look at each of the 5 challenges we've spoken about and really get after, in a meaningful way, the risks associated with each one of those 5 challenges, and then what I would call a cross-cutting risk of the joint force. So while it has been a couple of weeks late now, I hope you'll find it worth it. And again, one of the reasons why we kept it a little bit longer was so we could have an opportunity to do a face-to-face with the chiefs and the Secretary, and we did complete that last Monday.
Well, I do think this is important, and so I look forward to it. It is significant for the committee. If I can just make an offer again to both of you, it has been one of my goals, and I've certainly not been as successful as I wanted to reduce the paperwork burdens that Congress puts on the department. So fewer reports if a briefing can be done, a one-time report rather than a recurring report. I would offer again, if y'all want to submit to us reports that you think are superfluous or overly burdensome, not worth the time and effort, get me that. And I will definitely look at it, because I want to continue to reduce the unnecessary or less than necessary paperwork burdens that Congress puts on the department. At the same time, as you've heard today, what's left we're serious about. And so time is important. Again, we talked about the ISIS report. You come up with reprogramming requests. We don't have a strategy on where it's happening. So I'm trying to have fewer things, but be serious about the ones that we have. Please tell me and get it to me about things you think are unnecessary, but at the same time, as you've heard some of today, I think there is frustration when the law is not complied with. Finally, General Dunford, I saw an open letter, I don't know, signed by several dozen retired military, other notable names, that the time was right to relook at Goldwater Nichols of 30 years ago. And that we needed to be serious that significant changes were in order, although they did not detail what those changes should be, by the way, in the letter. So I want to ask you, your view is, I know there's a fair amount of interest about examining and perhaps modifying the Goldwater Nichols requirements. Please tell me where you think we are on that, if it needs to happen, and then suggestions you may have.
Thanks, Chairman. First of all, I do think there is an imperative for reform at this time, and I think it's a result of a change in the character of war. The basic nature of war, in my estimation, doesn't change. The character of war has changed. And by that specifically, I mean that most of the crises and contingencies that we have today, immediately trans-regional, they cut across multiple combatant commands. They're multi-domain, sea, air, space, cyberspace, undersea. and they're multifunctional: ballistic missile defense, special operations, strike capabilities, and so forth. And that has changed the nature of integration of the joint force, and frankly, the requirements for the Secretary to make timely decisions in a trans-regional, multi-domain, multifunctional fight. So I think the more fundamental areas that we need to look at for change with regard to Goldwater-Nichols is, number one, making sure that the Secretary does have the ability to make decisions in a timely manner, and making sure he does have the ability to integrate the joint force in that trans-regional, multi-domain, multifunctional fight. It also requires, in my estimation, the joint staff to take a different approach to strategy and to ensure that we write strategies for example, the problem sets we spoke about today. So it isn't just an aggregation of operations plans if you're dealing with a Russia or a China, but you have a strategic framework within which those operations plans are met. And I think the national military strategy needs to be refined in order to provide that framework within which old plans are developed. And then the final piece of that in execution is the Secretary's ability to prioritize and allocate resources in a timely manner for a fight that is ongoing in multiple combatant commands at the same time. So from my perspective, as we think about reform, we should focus on the character of war and what reforms are necessary to make sure we can fight in the 21st century. And what I've alluded to are some fundamental changes in warfighting in the 21st century that I think we can reinforce and optimize the joint forces' ability to meet with some very fundamental changes, and I'm prepared to make those recommendations to you, Chairman.
And may I just second that? That's exactly along the lines that we're thinking, Chairman. It was what I alluded to earlier. Obviously, we'll need your support if any of that requires statutory change, but those are the dimensions to which I'm looking to the Joint Staff and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and especially the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, given the changed nature of warfare. I would like to strengthen that.
Well, I'm anxious to see what you suggest, even if it's not all the reforms that some of these other folks are pursuing, but obviously with markup basically for this committee in about a month away, for us to have time to look at it, we will want to see it promptly.
I'm planning that to do that quite soon, and it will involve the capabilities of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Chairman, while preserving the independent military advice that they provide to me and the President.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you all three for being here today. The hearing stands adjourned.